DEM Director Janet Coy. We're expecting one more member of the council, but we do have a quorum, and we're ready to proceed with tonight's meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is the agenda itself. Does any member of the council have any recommended changes to the agenda? I noticed one just minor typo, item 10. It should be item 10, Bristol Harbor Shellfish Management Area Winter Harvest Schedule, has a 6 next to it. So we'll just, without objection, we'll just change that to number 10, and that'll put things in order. With that minor adjustment, are there any other recommended changes? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving the agenda as modified? Seeing none, the agenda as modified stands approved by consent, and we're on to the next item, and I think we can bundle these next two. We have 2 meeting minutes to approve from the past 2 council meetings, the first being on June 26, 2018, the second being on August 30, 2018. Are there any recommended changes to either of those 2 sets of meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any objection to adopting those meeting minutes as presented? Seeing no objection, both sets of meeting minutes stand approved by consent. And we're on to item 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone who is here this evening who would like to address the council on any issue that's not on tonight's agenda to do so. Would anyone like to address the council on any issue that's not on the agenda? Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Spencer Bode. I began working on boats in Point Judith at 16 on big offshore draggers. There's an idea right now in the Rhode Island commercial industry that we're going to develop a scup product that's a fillet. And my suggestion, my comment, is I would like to liberalize the scup possession limit when during the May, June, July, the summer months. Right now it's 10,000 pounds a week. I'm trying to liberalize it. I would like to see the possession limit go up to say maybe 10,000 pounds a trip, 20,000 pounds a trip. This way we could realize our full quota. Today I went on the website and it said I think there was 2 million pounds left. I just know we only catch 50% of our quota, and there's a lot of room for this project to grow, but we need to harvest the fish when the fish are close to our state waters. Scup is a volume species, it's not a high ex-vessel price species. So the more we catch it when it's close to us, it's better for our local fishermen, especially the ones in Rhode Island. That's one of the main species they target. A possession limit for 20,000 pounds a trip during those summer months would be positive for the draggers in Point Judith, and I really think that's something that we should try and get going on the table.
Thank you, Spencer, for that suggestion. Of course, we have an annual cycle of review of commercial issues such as possession limits. Jason, do you want to speak to perhaps where that might fit into the queue?
Yeah. So that Spencer, that stuff's coming up. We'll be going to hearing in November, which means we're going to be talking about that stuff this month. But I also, we aren't 2 million pounds under. That might be the federal quota that's under, not Rhode Island. We are under this year by, I'm not going to make up a number, I can't remember. We're a little bit under, but for the past few years, we've actually been over by a lot. So we've been doing a good job in our state of making sure we get.
We're over our scups landings?
For the past 2 years. The coast has not gone.
Yeah, the coast, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I'm suggesting, that our coast-wide, the ones that the states all share, that we need to have more liberalization here and be allowed to catch more fish, land more fish, counting against that federal quota. Does that sound right, Jason? Am I saying that?
Yeah, I think it's probably a larger discussion, so maybe you and I.
I'm just talking about the 10,000 pound possession limit that's during the summer months when the fish are on Charleston Beach. I would like to see that more liberalized this way. Higher. That's not, don't get me wrong, Massachusetts has something like that too, but here in Rhode Island we're trying to develop something, a product, and this is a volume fish. We need to have enough, if we want to develop this into the marketplace and really have scup be something that people eat 10, 15 years from now, we have to give the processors as much fish as we possibly give them and utilize our full allocated New England quota. I might get confused on the state and the New England one, but we have to catch it when it's close to us. This way, if it's going to be a frozen product, there's as much of it available and it can penetrate the markets where like a tilapia would or something. We just have to catch as much of it as we possibly can when it's on Charleston Beach. That's my comment. It's not an over-harvested species. You breed plenty of stuff. This is something that's undeveloped. We need to catch it when it's close to our port.
Thanks. So it sounds like that'll be an issue that could very well get teed up for the next round of public hearing issues So stay tuned to that, and particularly the next workshop, and I don't know if we have a date for that yet, but that'll be coming up soon. So thank you very much. That'll be a great issue to bring up at that time. Anyone else looking to address, is there anyone else who would like to address the council on any other issue? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 5, which is the 2019 Sector Management Plan. And just a brief intro here before I turn it over to Jason. Under statute, the DEM director, through the Marine Fisheries Council, does have a requirement to conduct an annual update to the state's FMPs, which is really has become known as our Sector Management Plan. And that update occurs concurrent with the annual review of commercial licensing regulations. The statute calls upon DEM to develop the update with the advice of the council. So for this agenda item, Jason will provide a brief overview of the 2018 update, and then I'll look to the council for any questions or input, and then I'll look to the council for a motion to recommend adoption of the updated plan if the council should see fit. We'll also make sure we tie in the IAC review of this, which I don't think drew any particular comments. But with that, I'll just turn the floor over to Jason for a brief review of the 2018 Sector Management Plan.
Yeah, I'm going to be really brief. You've got access to them if you wanted to look, and we did a decent job of getting this information out to the IAC, so they had it. The point of these sector plans is to get the information on the stocks out to the IAC and to you, so that you can use them while you're developing your recommendations for the various licensing categories. So generally, we have 3 plans: Finfish, Shellfish, and Crustacean. We give you information on the latest information on stock status, anything we know about quotas for the upcoming year, that sort of stuff. That's all still continues to be in there, but we worked on it a lot this year, and what we did was we condensed it into a single document rather than 3 separate documents. We sort of worked on them separately, and they all looked different and had different information. So we tried to standardize the information a little bit, so we were giving you consistent information across species. So that's one improvement that we made this year. I won't get into the details of the exact things. Happy to answer questions as we're going through about various species if you have questions. But in the end, we developed the plans, and we incorporate your part, the IAC and the council's pieces, and so they remain draft. They, at this point, just are the information that is needed for making licensing decisions, but we'll then incorporate your information, the recommendations that you make into them, and at that point we finalize them and distribute them to folks like the legislature and places like that. So just a really brief slide on what those are, and if you have any questions as we're going through the various pieces of this, happy to answer those.
I do know one of the recent changes was to clarify the statute so that it's no longer a regulatory issue, it's now more of a planning issue. Right. But it still follows the same protocol that Jay just went over. And that his presentation, or a presentation on the plans, was provided to the IAC. Chris or John, was there any feedback at all from the IAC on the what does IAC stand? Industry Advisory Committee. The Industry Advisory Committee had a meeting, and we're going to be going over parts of that. But I don't.
We didn't really. We concentrated primarily on exit-entry ratios and voting on which ones we would change or which ones we would keep. But we didn't really talk in any detail in the sector management plan, unless John has a recollection.
No, there weren't any comments offered on the sector plans.
Okay.
Maybe a couple. They wanted some graphs instead of tables. That was the one comment. So.
Thank you. So with that, it's to the council for questions, comments to Jason, or and if none, I would entertain a motion to recommend adoption of, and I said it wrong, it's the 2019 Sector Management Plan as proposed. And of course, with the caveat that the blanks, so to speak, or the gaps that will need to be filled in through tonight's meeting and the director's final decision on licensing will be filled in as a necessary follow-up. Would anyone on the council like to make a motion to recommend adoption of the 2019 sector management plan?
So moved.
Moved by Mike Rice, is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Andy D'Angelo. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved by consent, and the 2019 sector management plan, or the recommendation to adopt it, is approved by consent. And we're on to item 6, and that's the September 10th public hearing items. So here we have 13 items that went out to public hearing. 5 of those were the subject of some public comment. So what I suggested to Pete, and I think you're about to see this unfold, is that he organized his PowerPoint presentation, which would just be a brief run-through of the 13 items, beginning with those 8 for which we did not receive any public comment. He'll then pause, he'll put up a screen that sort of, itemizes all 8 of those. And then if anyone on the council would like to pull one or more out, we can do that. And then with regard to those remaining, all 8 or those remaining, we could take a bundled motion. We could take a motion that just addresses all 8 of them at once to recommend adoption, then move on to individually to the 5 for which there were public comment. I just was thinking that might help move things along, and it's completely up to the council whether you like that approach or would rather deal with them one by one. And you can make that decision after we reach the end of Pete's presentation, during which he'll run through those first 8. So, Pete, the floor is yours.
All right, the first one is proposed amendments to Part 1 definitions. This is just part of our continued effort to review the content of all the regulations for this item for this year, and we focus on terms relative to commercial licensing in gear to coincide with this annual public hearing, which deals with commercial licensing. As the slide says, none of the proposed changes are considered to be substantive. There were no public comments. It's very important that we delete those 2 terms, actively fishing and actively participating, as they are outdated and incomplete as written, with the intent of the terms adequately captured in the licensing regulations, so it makes those terms redundant and inaccurate. That is the summary of that. Just the deletion, a few clarifications, very minor, and 1 added term. That covers all of that.
Why don't you just continue to tick
Continue
through the
on.
items?
All
Yeah.
right, so
We'll go back to any that the council would like to go back to.
All right, so I'm gonna go so the number's gonna jump around, because I rearranged. So this item reflects programmatic corrections. Well, let me just give you a summary of what these are. So these ones you talked about, these 8, there's another one, 8 or 9, that reflect administrative and programmatic clarifications and corrections, where we're looking to sync up the regs with the current procedures. We did a very thorough review of the entire regulation. We identified these items as out of sync with the actual procedures that we're conducting. For all of these items that we're talking about, the rules were adopted in 2003. We've learned quite a few things along the way, so these changes reflecting the need to update the regs and sync up to what we're actually doing. So this first item right here reflects a programmatic correction, and is to add a due date for the public availability of the updated sector plan, the purpose being to provide a reasonable time frame by which to make plans publicly available, namely to the IEC, prior to the hearing on licensing matters. We've chosen this 30 days as his time frame. We normally have the hearing mid-September, so we looked at the plan out in draft form by mid-August this year. Our hearing was September 10th, and indeed we did get the plan in draft form to the IEC on August 10th. So we're thinking that system works pretty well as it is. The second one is not the same, but very much related. This is to remove language regarding the content and due date for the issuance of the annual report to the General Assembly on the conservation and management of marine fisheries resources. That's the sector plan. The reason we want to get rid of this, the time frame for submittal and content of this annual report to the General Assembly is adequately covered in statute. It's not appropriate or needed for rules, as they are non-regulatory in nature. However, in this section, there is a due date for the submittal of this plan. We believe this date is September 15th to be reflective of the need for the sector management plan to be drafted and made publicly available. we interpret this annual report and the sector management plan to be one and the same. But rather than transfer that hard date, we proposed the flexible date of 30 days prior to the hearing to assure that the IAC has adequate time to see the plans and formulate recommendations. The date of September 15th is maybe too late for them. So like we said, we got it to them at August 10th, way before that. So those two go together. The next couple relate to notification requirements. So before I got into those two, I wanted to tell you what we actually did in terms of mailing to current licensees, which is what we're doing here is the reason why we're asking to remove these other two. There's actually a third, and we have actually never done these. They've been in place since '03, and we've never actually done these. I'll get into those in a second. But just what we do. First statute, November 1st, all current licensees get a notice from Margaret's office that their current license is going to expire and that they need to renew. Provides the renewal deadline, provides the grace period, provides that data reporting must be completed. And after that, the end of November, Marine Fisheries mails out to all license holders per rule. Anyone who's deficient in reporting gets a letter. Mid-December, renewal applications get mailed out to all current licensees. And then mid-March, we have a final mailing for anyone who has not renewed. So we have many steps in place to make sure we're helping folks not have an accidental non-renewal. So that's what we do. So here's what we want to get rid of. This number 4. My specs here. Yes, it's a safeguard type of rule. We're proposing to remove the language regarding the requirement that the department provide a list of reporting requirements at the time of license issuance or renewal. We've never followed this. The language refers to a list. We're not really sure what that list is. At the time of application, the applicants must identify the reporting method, logbook, SAFES. At the time of application, they have to identify. So they're already past the point of needing any list of requirements. It's a safeguard that was put in '03. We're suggesting that it doesn't provide any safeguard, and we don't see any value in this regulation. Number 9, jumping around here, very similar in nature. Division proposal to remove the requirement that license holders will be notified in writing as to the form of such reports, their content, and the manner in which and frequency with which they are required to be transmitted, and we do that by December 1st. Very similar to number 4 that we just went over. We have never followed it. Other rules remain in place that I just went over that requires what we think is the main thing. If you have a reporting deficiency, you cannot renew. We let you know on several occasions that if you have a reporting deficiency, we give you notify you, we give you ample opportunity to address it so you don't miss out on the opportunity to renew. So if reporting requirements change, which this is kind of referring to that they might change, it's all done through public hearing. It's heard by the IAC, it's heard by the council, the point being that any proposed change to the requirement is well noticed and well vetted. Then if we actually do adopt a change, we provide a notice about the change as well. So many steps in place. We think that adequately covers the way we are doing it, so we don't need this, is what we're suggesting. Number 6. Number 6, division proposal to broaden the applicable. This is pretty straightforward. Regarding the time frame for when fishing trips must be documented. It's just if we're just looking, it's in the wrong section. It's just it applies to all license holders. Where it is, it could be misinterpreted as meaning it only applies to license holders that hold this endorsement. So we just need to move that. Don't confuse this with another one that's coming up, which we're actually proposing to change that time frame. That's not this. This is just to move it, so we broaden the applicability to all license holders, which is very consistent with statute. So there's no real change there. Number 8, this is another just oversight on our part where we have these reporting due dates. We only identify these currently in our logbook instructions. We absolutely need to have these in regulations so the licensees are aware of it and they're enforceable. So that's just moving, copying from the reporting the logbook instructions into regulation. And 10, this is, I think this is the last one of these. Yeah, so this is the last one of these basic administrative corrections. Proposal to amend the date that requires the department to issue new licenses following the application deadline. Proposal is to change from 15 to 19 days. The reason the 15 is not currently being met, has never been met. It's unrealistic due to the volume of applications received. The 90-day time frame just gives us a more realistic time frame. We originally noticed this to just remove the time frame. The IAC did give us some feedback. They were a little reluctant to say, that's kind of important that it says you have to provide this. So we went back and said, let's just pick a date that's reasonable and not take it out. So we went from 15 to 90 days for this proposal. That covers all these programmatic corrections that we're looking at.
You don't by chance have those all on one slide?
I forgot to put a
That's
summary
okay.
together.
Well, so I guess it's up to the council how you want to proceed. I also want to see, first, Jay, did you have anything more to add? I think Pete did a pretty good run through there.
no, that was
And
good.
obviously, division is support. So these were all sort of fall into the general category of trying to streamline and update the licensing regulations. There were no comments offered at hearing on any of these particular items. There were on the ones that we're about to go to next on an individual basis. Would anyone on the council like to see any of these pulled out and addressed individually? Or is there potentially an interest on the part of the council via a motion to recommend adoption of them as a bundled group?
Jeff, can I just ask a question first?
Absolutely.
Item 8. How does, so I've been going through all the regs and everything in this. I found a bunch of discrepancies between what can happen when you're paper logbook or if you're electronic reporting. How would this, so this is for the logbooks, I'm assuming. That's what it says in the logbooks. How would DEM, does DEM have the I don't know, ability to monitor the electronic reporting for these dates?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we can tell when people do their reports. The electronic reports tend to come in as the trips happen, whereas the paper logbooks, the way our paper logbook's set up, it's on month per month basis, and you can fill it out by the month. You can fill it out. You can put several months on one actual logbook. We have many rows. So instead of having people send it in very frequently, we made the decision to do the paper logbooks quarterly. Certainly, if someone was not taking a lot of trips and doing electronic, they would minimally have to meet those deadlines, because right now our rule is to fill it out prior to the next trip. So we could see when people submit those electronic reports as well.
Okay, that's what I'm at. So if someone doesn't send in their logbook, they could be, in violation of this now. Would the same thing happen for electronic reporting? That's what I want. Is that something you're going to actively look at?
It's not something that's high on our radar, to be honest. We look at compliance at the end of the year for renewal period. We do monitor, as the year progresses. However, our rule right now is that the logbook must be filled out prior to the next trip. So, just a bizarre example, say you had, you were fishing in the first quarter there, and you went on a trip in March, and you weren't going to go again until May. Then you'd have to put that electronic report into the computer by April 15th, okay? So if you're doing it correctly though, if you're doing the electronic reports, you are going fishing, you are documenting your trip, you're submitting your trip electronically, and then you get taken care of all at once. Suppose there could be a situation where people aren't submitting it and they just want to do it all at once. Technically, they're not filling out prior to the next trip. So minimally, we would, expect to see things here on April 15th, but the rule is to have it filled out prior to your next trip. So.
Yeah, I get it, I'm just having a hard time with the due, the due date things. If the department's looking at it as collective, like, okay, what we're holding over your head is renewal. So we're holding the renewal over your head, so you're gonna have everything in to renew. It's like, well, what does the due dates matter? I'm having a harder time, we're making these regs that could be selectively enforceable. And I'm having a hard time, like, if it's renewal, what we're worried about, then that's the thing, it needs to be done before renewal. If it's some other date, we need to make it, I'm just having a hard time with the I don't know, purpose or I hate having things like selectively enforceable, that's all I'm looking at.
Sure, and just to maybe explain ourselves, these dates were set up prior to electronic reporting being in place. This was to address paper. We didn't want, the first year, lesson learned, we got all the logbooks at the end of the year, it was a disaster, so we switched to this. We did a quarterly for a minimal submittal date. It is difficult to conform the electronic reporting to this, and that's also part of our agenda here, to have the trip submitted before landing as well. We really want to reduce recall bias here as well. So, if you're doing it quarterly, we feel like you're maybe remembering a little bit better. Can we go and see if someone put in their logbook that they, fished prior to their next trip? No, we really can't unless you're boarded and they examine your paper logbook there. Electronic's a lot easier. It's in the computer, you hit submit, we've got it all in front of us. So this is really, yes, it does apply, because we are moving it to the section for all data reporting. It does apply to electronic reporting. Generally, it doesn't come up, just the nature of the way people report electronically.
Question, any other questions? Chris, Ryan?
I have another question. Pete, I don't remember which item it was, but it's about, in general, about the reporting requirements and how fishermen are notified. I mean, not having seen very many licenses in front of me, are reporting requirements, are fishermen notified or told what reporting requirements are when they get their license, or are they referred to the regulations to understand what the reporting requirements are?
They are required to identify their reporting method at the time of application.
Okay.
That I can tell you. So I'll turn to John again, but to me that means they know what they are.
Yeah, what I'm getting at, I mean, the reason for my question, I'm thinking about other permitting processes that I'm familiar with. And so when you get a permit or a license, normally there's a list of conditions that says, if you're going to use this permit or you're going to use this license, here's what you have to make sure you do to stay in compliance. Is that part of our licensing process?
I'm not sure that's a great comparison.
Okay.
I know.
I'm just, but that's the
and,
genesis of my question. I'm curious to make sure that
again,
people are adequately informed of what their reporting requirements are, so that they don't.
And I think that's why a couple of these things were put in place back in the day. And what we're suggesting is that, because if they do change, no, there is no list to provide. There's not a lot. There's only a couple of ways to actually do it. So you're selecting that. If we change it, it's through a public hearing.
Okay.
And there's not a lot to report. There's no list.
Right. Okay.
I think I'd like to add something, Mr. Chair. So when a fisherman gets a logbook, there's several pages that sort of describe exactly what they need to do. And we also provide access to that. It's on our website, I believe. So there's lots of access to exactly what they need to do logistically to make sure their reports are complete. And if they come into us, a paper logbook, for instance, and it's not done correctly, we always contact them to correct it. So there's, the point we're trying to get at here is we do all sorts of, above and beyond any of this already, to make sure people are doing things correctly, and all of the information is provided to them in lots of different ways.
That's a great question. I mean, because I do see here that it pertains not only to commercial harvesters, but as dealers as well. So if somebody comes in and gets a new dealer's license, just to kind of echo what I think Chris Ryan was asking, how would they know, is there a process in place already where they are notified as to what they need to do to report? I think the answer is yes. You could just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll look to either Margaret or John to jump in on the dealer licenses. I don't know
Sure, so when we get a new dealer license, we are notified by Margaret's office that they've gotten a license, and we reach out to them personally, to be quite honest, offer them training. Often it involves a site visit. We just find that front loading like that makes the process a lot easier for everyone. It's not required, certainly if they want to go through the instructions on their own, they can, but we do reach out to them once we find out that they're there.
So it really just seems like, if you want to go back to that, Pete, I think that was item 4. And so, there it is. So this is just striking this sort of antiquated language that says that at the time someone applies for a license in Margaret's office, they're handed a list of requirements. It sounds like what has happened over time is that the process has evolved to a direct interaction with whether they be harvesters or dealers. And so there is no such list that gets handed to them. And I think that's all this particular modification is seeking to address. But good questions. Other questions from the council on any of the items that we've gone over so far? Yeah, Travis?
Just on number 10 there, it says I know you said that you're currently not you're not really working to the 15-day window, but going to 90 days, 90 business days is pretty extreme. I mean, that's 4 months.
Big jump, yes.
30.
We'll go to Margaret for that one. Why we need 90 days?
Well, we clearly need more than 15 days, just because of the volume that we receive, and to go through them and give each application the time it deserves. So like Pete said earlier, we wanted to remove the 15-day altogether, and at the IAC, members weren't comfortable just giving us open-ended, you know, it could take us 6 months, which we weren't gonna do, but fair enough. So then we proposed 90 days. So typically, the deadline's February 28th. Typically, we have everything in place by May 1st. Whether there's going to be lotteries or just new license issuance.
Okay. So would it be fair to make whatever the number is to May 1st? I mean, 90 business days is the first week of July. I mean, somebody's putting in a license for the first week of July, they've already missed a chunk of the season, depending on what
Understood,
they're fishing
yeah.
for.
Well, why don't we do this? These are excellent questions. I'm going to suggest we go right back. I'm going to renege on my suggestion that we bundle these, because I really think these have been some excellent interactions, and I sense there might even be some motions that might not be fully consistent with what's being proposed. So let's go right back to the beginning, and we'll move through this quickly. But I'm going to suggest, just for the sake of transparency and accountability, that we move through the items one by one. So Pete, why don't you just put right back up item 1, part 1 definitions. And I'll just take motions on these, and I think some of these will move very quickly. And again, we can certainly entertain additional questions, but there's been enough to make me feel that I want to do these one by one now. So on this first issue, which is just a modification to the definitions, are there any questions that have, any further questions? I don't think there's been any else on this yet. Would anyone like to make a motion regarding this item? Chris Ryan?
Motion to approve the proposed revised definitions as shown.
To recommend adoption, recommend to the director adoption as proposed. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Jeff Grant. So moved by Chris Ryan, seconded by Jeff Grant to recommend adoption of this part 1 change to definitions. Any discussion, further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent. And let's move on to the next one, Pete. This
Probably get 2 and 3 together.
2 and 3 together? Well,
Yeah.
let's just make sure that council's comfortable with them. So, part number 2, adding the 30 days prior to any public hearing, okay. And then 3, do you want to put that up as well? So these do go together. I think Pete's already provided a pretty good explanation of them. Are there any questions on 2 or 3? Is council clear on what's being proposed? Would anyone like to make a motion, perhaps bundling these 2 together? Chris?
I move that we bundle items 2 and 3 and accept the proposed amendment and recommend accepting the proposed amendment.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Andy D'Angelo. So moved by Chris Ryan and seconded by Andy D'Angelo to recommend adoption of both public hearing items 2 and 3. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any opposition to the motion? See no opposition. The motion passes by consent. And so we've done part 1, we've done 2 and 3, and now we're on to 4. This is the one we just got done discussing, and we can continue to discuss if you'd like. This is the issue of just striking that language regarding providing a list of reporting requirements at the time of license issuance or renewal, given the, evolved interactions that have become the norm as far as how the department and division interacts with new licensees and harvesters and dealers. Would anyone, any questions or comments on this? Anyone like to make a motion on this? Move approval. Moved by Mike Rice to recommend approval of item 4. Is there a second? Seconded by Jason Jarvis. So moved by Mike Rice, seconded by Jason Jarvis to recommend approval of item 4. Any further discussion, Chris?
Just to be absolutely clear, so, pardon me, so we remove this requirement to provide a list of reporting requirements. A license holder either has a license already, or when they receive a new license, they are either given a logbook or given instruction on how to report electronically, and in that logbook or in that electronic instruction, there's some way that provides them what the requirements are. How do they find out what the requirements are for reporting that?
I think that's a great question. John, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So one way is, like you said, the easy way is if you get the logbook, the instructions are right there. It goes through it field by field. If you go in electronically, all of the fields are there electronically as well that you have to fill out. We have instructions online. The regulation also details all the fields needed. We actually have videos on how to do it as well online. And I even believe most of the boxes have a little pop-up, info box that comes up as well. But it is, we have it laid out, at least in my mind, pretty logically. So all of the fields are required to go in, and you cannot go forward without completing the form. So it works like that for both the dealer and the e-trip, the electronic logbook.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, Jeff, I just will say, DM does a good job of helping fishermen with reporting requirements, explaining what it is. They've done a great job for dealers and for fishermen, so I don't have any problems with that.
Thank you for those comments. Would anyone like to make a motion regarding item 4?
I think we did.
Oh, we did, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was
Motion
just
made.
asking a
Oh,
question.
yes, moved, I'm sorry. Was that Chris and Andy, I'm sorry. Jason, Chris and Jason. Chris moved and Jason seconded. Recommend adoption 4. We had a good couple of questions. Any further questions? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent, and we're on to the next item, which is 9. Let's see. And Pete, can you just once again just kind of remind the council exactly what this is seeking to do?
It seems very similar to the previous one.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. There's a date there.
Isn't this the certified letter one?
No.
No, it's not the flash.
No.
I can offer a little bit of insight. So I used to use this December 1st date when we were developing the logbook. We, in the early stages, we were still cutting our teeth on what type of data we needed, and maybe one year we needed the number of traps hauled, the next year we wanted the number of traps hauled, the number of traps fished. My understanding is that we had to notify people that we were requiring more information prior to December 1st. Or I guess on the backside, not requiring as much.
And so this has not been followed since 2003. It just has not become a relevant, it's not a relevant issue, it sounds like.
I can't imagine that there's anything out there we don't ask these guys to report anymore. So
Yeah.
to be a little glib about it.
So with that, is there any further questions or would anyone like to make a motion on this item?
Move to recommend approval.
Moved by Mike Rice, seconded by Travis Barrow to recommend approval. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent, and we're on to the next, which is item 6.
Just to broaden the applicability, that data, reporting is required by all licensees. It's just incorrectly located in the wrong section.
Okay, They're just relocating in the section. This one is just a administrative.
It goes to the data reporting section that applies broadly to all licensees.
Anyone like to make a motion on this? Moved by Travis Barrow, seconded by Chris Ryan to recommend adoption of item 6. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent, and we're on to the next one,
There it is.
which is 8. This is the one that Jeff had a couple questions on, but this is language that I guess was in the logbooks and therefore required, but it hadn't been set forth in regulation, so now it's being proposed to be set forth in regulation for the reasons that were already discussed. Any further discussion or questions on this one? Would anyone like to make a motion? I realize this one may not be as, these aren't juicy issues, I get that, but this is the division's attempt to kind of really streamline and clear up the licensing regs. So this is one.
Okay, I'll move, recommend approval.
By Mike Rice, is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Jason Jarvis. So moved by Mike Rice, seconded by Jason Jarvis to recommend adoption of item 8. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent. And I think we're on to the last one of this batch, and then we're gonna roll up our sleeves for the rest.
15 to 90.
I'm sorry?
15 to 90.
Yeah, so this is the one which gave me the reason to think that we really did want to take these one by one, and my apologies for trying to streamline a little too much. So, Travis, I think you were the one that was suggesting that 90 days, while it might be within the time frame that Margaret is comfortable with, pushes it out potentially deep into the summer. And I believe you had potentially a suggested alternative approach?
Yeah, I think Margaret had said that they try to wrap up by May 1st, is that?
We try to, yes. To date, I haven't gone past May 1st to finalize everything. And then the lotteries are usually like 2 weeks out from that final date, just to give people notice and the opportunity to attend.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess if anybody else has any comments, otherwise I would make a motion to amend it to 45 business days, which would take you out to about May 1st.
No, second the amendment.
So we have a motion by Travis Barrow, seconded by Mike Rice, to recommend, in lieu of the division's proposal under number 10, to change it from 15 days to 90 days, to change it from 15 to, was it 45? 45 days. So 45 days is the motion on the table. Discussion, I guess I'll first ask to Margaret and we have Christina Hufschmidt, our legal counsel, here for response and comment to the motion on the table. Christina?
Well, first off, it says 90 days, so that's not business days.
No, it says 90 business days, right?
No, 90 days.
This is 90 days.
Oh, you
It's
don't
not
have, you don't have the
business.
same slide from September 10th though, because it says business days on that one.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I'll find you the actual reg. in a
Okay.
second.
No, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the other slide.
All right, no, well, I mean, if it's 90 days, then I think that takes us basically to May 1st, May 15th.
The regulation says 90 business days.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so 90 business days is different than 90 days.
Correct.
So, good call.
Big difference.
Yeah.
So the suggestion is, again, the motion to change it to 45 business days following the application deadline, which is February 28th. Margaret, is that, as somebody who's right in the thick of things, your thoughts on that?
Well,
On this proposal?
it's clearly better than the 15 days. So,
And it comports with past practice. I sense your
Correct.
hesitancy in the sense of what if, you went to, slightly beyond that. I
Correct.
mean, it's a self-imposed, not a
Correct.
self-imposed, it's a regulatory requirement that your office is gonna have to meet if this were to go forward and the director were to adopt this recommendation. And I sense that you're feeling cautiously
well, just
optimistic that you can meet it.
apprehensive. Just not knowing how many licenses we're potentially issuing next year. Last year was the first year we issued such a large number of restricted finfish. So we had just a boost in volume of applications and people who had a lot of substantial backup, not just applications coming in, people who had years of affidavits, years of fishing history. So it just took us that much longer to review all the applications. So 45 days clearly is better than 15. So in 90, you feel is too much of a stretch, which
Well,
is fair.
I think you just wanna be able to give.
People the
an
opportunity to
applicant
be
a- yeah,
licensed.
Realistic, sure. I mean, right now it's 15 and you guys aren't doing that, there's no repercussion, and there, basically an applicant has no thought that you're gonna get that done in 15 days, so you kinda just push the button and I'll get it when I get it, so.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. So, for the motion on 45 business days, Jeff Grant?
So, I mean, when I first read this, I thought just removing the 15 days was acceptable. Because the job,
Yeah, 'cause
when
that's
you know,
makes
years
sense.
ago, I put in for the lottery
That's
stuff,
tough.
and it was like, I think it was like the middle of March, and they were holding the lotteries because there was so few people and so few licenses they were giving out. And then as more people put it in, it becomes longer and longer. And I will say that from my experience on knowing people going through the process, is it varies based on, they're not looking to get it done in under 90 days or under 15 days. They're doing it in the amount of time they can do it. I don't think they're dragging their feet or anything. I mean, I'm sure the stacks of paperwork are gonna be astronomical with that going there. So, I mean, my thought was originally just to remove the 15 days and, they do it when they get it done. And that's, I mean, that's the way it has to happen. I mean, you don't wanna, when there's a large number of licenses and a large number of applicants, they need to go through them. And the way it's set up now is there's a lot of, vetting that needs to be done on each application, so it takes a while.
Chris Ryan?
So, but, what Travis said kind of resonated with me, and so I have a question for discussion and a thought, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but if somebody is getting a license, that means they intend to use it to fish, and they're paying for it, and for the process to prevent somebody from making full use of the license that they're paying for just seems quite unfair. So maybe I'm not understanding this, but if I were to go on February 28th and put in an application for a license, and I wanted to start fishing as soon as, the fishing season started for me, and I was prevented from doing it until, June 1st or July 1st, to me that would be a hardship that would devalue the license, at least for that first year anyway. So I don't wanna just cavalierly pick a date, and I guess I just wanna understand fully what the consequences are to the fishermen, because, that's what, they're the biggest part of this game, right? They're the people that are going out and catching the fish and bringing the fish in to be sold, and so putting them at an inconvenience for something that they've paid for just doesn't seem quite right.
Understood. Jason?
Yeah, just for the counter, if we were just taking applications, randomly taking from the pile however many licenses were available, I would be more in line with your argument, but that is not the system that was developed and has been supported by this council. It's pretty intricate. There are levels that we have to go through, Margaret's office, and I think we're talking probably about 2 people, maybe at best, not a, office full of people have to go through not just the applications to see if they're good, but then all the supporting material, how many years did you fish on that vessel as a deck-hand. It's not a simple procedure, and that's why if we wanted to change it to make this part more streamlined, then we should change all of that part of it as well. Not seeing that as an option tonight. I mean, we're just asking for a little more time, and I think May 1st, even May 15th, for folks who are going to be fishing inshore at least, that's when the fish are, coming inshore, and I don't think it's that big of a burden. If they're going offshore, then January 1st, anytime after that would have been a burden. So we're already past that.
Margaret, I know the number varies, but in a given year, when you add up the totality of new license applications, give us a sense of the number that you're...
Approximately 250 applications come in. I've had as many as 300 come in.
and I know I've seen the pile.
Yes.
Because you, and
Right, and
it
we have
literally
to-
is a pile like this high.
Right,
with all
Bob,
this
and then we
equipment.
have to verify not only what people submit to us, and then it's based on what's reflected in the safest reporting. So then we have to go in and query everybody's, you know, record and years, there's just volumes of work to be done.
Yeah.
Also to ensure a fair system
Oh, yeah,
whereby
absolutely.
those who are prioritized as new licensed applicants are essentially, you know, acknowledged and accommodated. And the only way to do that is to go through all the paperwork that's submitted. So, you know, that at least provide, not to counter your concern, but to just offer a little bit more background.
No, I think, and I'm grateful for the explanation, and I asked the question knowing that I don't know very much about what the process is to get from an application to an actual license. So this issue, changing this, I think we can deal with this now. You know, perhaps at some point in the future, the trouble that, you know, Margaret and one or two other people have wading through a couple of hundred applications probably ought to be addressed, but tonight's not the night to do that.
Fair enough. So, yeah, Travis?
I guess just one final question, I don't know if it's Jay or Margaret, or, I mean, you're not able to work to the 15 days today. What's the repercussion to the department? I mean, other than nothing, so it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, you're right, and we recognize that. We recognize that there are no repercussions, and yet, it seems awkward to have a regulatory standard that not only, that can't be met. And so I think what this is attempting to do is to put a more realistic, maintain the regulatory standard, in contrast to having it be open-ended, which is another approach, but have that standard be a little bit more in keeping with current practice.
I think I was just trying to get to a realistic expectation for an applicant.
Very good point. I think this has been an excellent discussion. I think we've had a good discussion on the two perspectives, the division, Margaret's office in particular, and then to the point that you've been making, Travis, and others, you know, in fairness to the applicant who needs a timely response. What does timely mean? Well, right now, it would mean to the council, if this motion were to go forward and the director were to agree to it, a 45 business day limit to the time that the office can take to render final decisions. So that's the motion. Andy?
I kind of agree with Jeff. I mean, you gotta give them, I don't think they're gonna be, you know, dragging their feet on it. I think they're gonna try and get them done as quick as they can, so it's kind of hard to put a deadline on it. You know, just let them, you know, do it. I can't see where you can, you know, there's gonna be times when there's gonna be a lot of applications and stuff. Maybe they can't get it done in 45 days.
They don't. I mean, as we just talked about. So, I mean, yeah, this is kind of like a tough one. It's sort of like important to try to get it right, but on the other hand, it's impossible to get right because of the vagaries of the system. Mike?
Yeah, I think basically having a deadline in the regulations basically gives a signal that this is kind of the work expectations. And if there are troubles, then the director would have some argument to go to the finance committee or something like that. We need a couple more people or something like that. Look at what things are.
Yeah, and to Jason's point, you know, or revisit the whole process by which new licensing decisions are made, and perhaps try to streamline that. Right now, it is what it is, and I think your point's well taken. So, I think we had a really good discussion on it, and certainly if depending on how this vote goes, if somebody were to want to suggest a substitute motion, that's certainly the council's prerogative. At this point, because I have heard no recommendation for a substitute motion, I'll ask, is the council ready for the question, which is a vote on the motion to recommend adoption of a 45-day business day standard to replace the 15-day standard? Is the council ready for that question? And if so, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? Absent? Opposed? One opposition. So 5 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Good discussion on that. Now we're on to, I think we have we have 5 more items, and each of these, I think, has a little bit more to it, so we'll see how that goes. Pete, you want to introduce this one?
Certified mails. The division proposal to remove the language regarding the requirement that the department notify license holders of a reported deficiency via certified mail. We feel it's another safeguard type of rule. We think has limited value, really hasn't been followed. We gave you all the notifications, the 4 mailings that we do. We think that's adequate. We think that's certainly reasonable that the department is on notice to give the licensees a heads up that that it's going to expire, that you have a deficiency, therefore you may have a problem renewing. The certified mail really doesn't do anything for the licensee. It's really for us to show proof that we did it. It doesn't provide any safeguard to the licensee. Some folks won't even go near a certified mail. They'll just will refuse it. So we're not really sure that it has, we're saying that it doesn't have a lot of value to require it, and we think we've got it covered with the ones that we already do, adequately covered to let them know that there's a problem.
Yet there was some concern expressed at hearing on this, if I'm
There
not
was
mistaken.
one comment from Ken, it's not here. He was concerned. I couldn't really tell you exactly what his concern. He kind of said, I have a problem, then he kind of said, I didn't have a problem with it. He was trying to relate it to other things that we were talking about. I tried to describe that comment as best as I could. And
I can try to paraphrase. So my understanding of what Ken was suggesting is without his comment was without this, there's no sort of formal way to know. And his fear was the result of that is that somebody could get sanctioned without there being any official record. I guess I couldn't really, it was a public hearing, so I couldn't respond to him. But what I would suggest to you is that we are doing way more than sending one certified mail. It's multiple phone calls. We are making sure people can come in, we'll train them. Again, this is along the same lines of what we were talking about. We don't think that this is a very efficient use of taxpayer money to be sending out certified mail. And what we're doing is way more effective than this would be. And so we are just suggesting removing this requirement, which even with all of the things that we do, because this is on the books, if somebody challenged us, we could have an issue. So we think that what we're doing is not just adequate, but way more than adequate. We invest a lot into making sure people are compliant, give them ample opportunities to become compliant. So, there's really no need for this.
Could you go back to the screen that summarized the processes currently in place?
I'll just add, just so if it's not clear, the rule stays in place, only looking to just take the certified mail out of the rule. The rule itself stays.
And that was exactly what I was going to point to is,
Yeah, it's coming up. It's right
there it is. So, this is the November 1 mailing, right, that this is pertaining to. And,
I think it's the end of November.
no, I'm sorry, it's the end of
No,
November.
right.
It's the end of November mailing. So it's that second bullet, the end of November mailing, about 1,000 or so go out, and they would still go out, they just wouldn't go out certified mail.
They are going out and they're not going out certified mail
Under
right
the
now.
proposal that's being presented. So I just want to make sure the council's clear on what's changing. It's not the notification itself, it's the nature of the notification. That is a regular mailing versus a certified mailing for various reasons, including the cost of taxpayers, and the fact that it doesn't necessarily mean that the recipient gets it. It just means that the department has proof that it went out. So, discussion on this proposal. Questions on this proposal? Would anyone like to make, Mike Rice?
Yeah, I'd like to recommend approval of this number 5.
Seconded by Chris Ryan. So moved by Mike Rice, seconded by Chris Ryan to recommend adoption of the of item 5 as proposed. Discussion on the motion. Any, if not, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion is approved by consent, and we have just a couple more, I think, 2 more.
We are getting there, slow but sure.
All right.
Restricted Finfish endorsement, we have this is a regulatory proposal. Two proposals went out. We just went through both. The ISD gave us, came up with a vote to go from 1 to 2, and John can talk about it.
Sure. So, so we have 2 proposals here. One is status quo, and one is a IAC proposal. The reason why we have them both up here is at the IAC we had a little confusion as far as the rules of order, and we actually had 2 approved motions, so we felt it was only appropriate to have them both up there. I will say that the IAC vote, various voting blocks approved both of these. So, it's one is the status quo, where we would release 1-to-1 exit entry of restricted finfish licenses. These are the licenses to fish for quota species. And in that case, it would be, we had, I believe, 14 retired last year, so that would result in 15 being released. The other proposal would liberalize that and would be for every 1 that exits, we'd issue 2 licenses, and that would result in 30 new licenses.
Very good. So the proposal, I'm sorry, Jason, yes?
Yeah, so just to offer
Yep.
the division's thoughts on this, and so our proposal was that 15 stay with the status quo. The reason for that is when you look over the restricted finfish species, in particular this year there is a lot of uncertainty for some of the headline species, summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, which will all be going, summer flounder is currently going through its benchmark assessment. Black sea bass will be going through an enhanced update, I guess I'll call it. All of this hinges around the recalibrated MRIC, the recreational information. So a lot of uncertainty, and then, you know, there was some good news and some not so good news in amongst the rest of the restricted species. So we looked back, we released about, I think we did 18 last year, but staying in that ballpark of about 15 in a given year does not seem to impact catch rates dramatically in the subsequent year. That's kind of the analysis that we do, is comparing, we released 18, did we see a statistically different increase in catch rates? And we don't. So it seems to be adequately offsetting what has left the fishery in a given year. Doubling it, we did not look at that. So we would have had to do a more thorough analysis, which, you know, we didn't anticipate that, and so did not do that. And I am uncomfortable saying that 30 new licenses wouldn't impact catch rates. And there's not like there's a lot of growth potential. The quotas are roughly where they were. Some are more, some are less, but across all of them, they're about flat. So for us, staying at status quo, allowing the release of 15 is something that we still support, and we're not supportive of release of 30.
Thanks, Jay. And public hearing comments, I believe there were some on this item. I know it's in your meeting materials. All for number 1? Status quo. Okay. So we can confirm that, but it sounds like all of the public hearing comments were in support of option 1, status quo. Questions from the council? Chris Ryan.
I just want to add a little perspective, because although I'm going to give the IAC minutes later, you know, it actually was really split at the IAC. It was, you know, some folks, everybody gave good reasons, but it was really split. Both of those motions had 3 yes votes and 2 opposed and 1 abstained. So it was, I just wanted to let the council know that the IAC, in fact, was split kind of right down the middle too.
Jay?
Yeah, just to maybe riff off Chris a little bit. So the big, my take on the big reasoning for going to 30 was the concept of getting just to quote what people were saying at the meeting, getting new blood into the fishery, which, you know, I'm supportive of that concept, certainly, but 30 is just too much new blood. Like, it makes me uncomfortable as far as the impact that it will have. But that was what the IAC was talking about. I didn't really hear any other arguments
That
for
was
that.
pretty much the issue, yeah. Trying to encourage new fishermen to come into the industry.
Understood. Okay, would anyone like to make a motion? Andy?
Make a motion, we stay status quo.
Is there a second? Seconded by Jeff Grant. So moved by Andy D'Angelo, seconded by Jeff Grant to recommend adoption of status quo. Discussion on the motion?
So just quickly, last year we doubled what the number we would have given out. So, you know, we basically went from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1. So we already doubled it last year. So we've only got 1 year of giving out more licenses. Usually it's in the 6 to 9 range. So we're kind of, I'd like to see a few more years on that. I mean, we're on such low, we got short seasons and low possession limits. Adding more fuel to that fire is not going to help. And if you want new entrants, you got to make sure that the people who are getting into it are getting into it to try to have something to catch. You know, if we have shorter seasons and lower limits, younger people like myself, you know, are less likely to get into it. So it's kind of a counterintuitive.
So this was the first season at 1-1?
This last year was.
Yeah, last year.
I fully agree with the intent. A few years worth of data doesn't hurt.
Thank you for that. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is the council ready for the question? If so, all in favor, raise your hand. And it's unanimous in support. Thank you very much. And I think we have just one more, if we're not mistaken. Sorry.
I think there's 3 actually, yeah. The big proposal change the time frame that fishing trips must be documented. Certainly had some discussion at the public hearing about this. And the IAC, John can,
John or Chris, you want to speak to the IC?
Yeah, sure, I can address this one. So this one did have a lot of passionate discussion. One thing I want to clarify here right off the bat is the definition of land is either to come in and offload and or secure to the dock. It was not, there was a little bit of a misunderstanding where it was implied that it was actually entering the harbor. That's not the case. It's to offload and or secure. First let me go through our intentions here. So we want to change it to prior to landing. Right now the rule is that you would have to document your trip prior to going out on your next trip. We want to change it to go to, so we want your trip documented prior to your landing. That is prior to you coming and tying up and offloading here. And just to clarify, because there was some confusion between the difference between documenting and submission. Okay, so documenting is just the simple act of recording some very basic information about what you have on your trip. Okay, minimally, and I will say this is something that we did get comments on, and I do agree we need to set a standard as to what the minimum requirements would be for a documentation of a trip. I did reach out to my federal counterpart in Point Judith, asking how they document, because I will say that they have this rule as well to go to prior to landing documentation. Sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So NOAA Fisheries has a rule. You have to document your trip prior to landing. We have prior to your next trip. So I asked, well, how exactly do you do that? Well, apparently they're still using VTR forms. They're still available. These are forms printed by the federal government. We don't want to be in the business of printing out any more forms that we have to or providing anything like that. So we would like to have people document their trips in basically a captain's logbook. Many vessels already have them. I understand that could be a challenge on a center console, small open craft. However, we do have, there's plenty of little, I meant to bring one tonight, but there are plenty of little notebooks, Write and Rain notebooks you can keep on your boat. Really why we want to make this change is we've been approached from many sectors of by many people to try to be more flexible in our management, move to things such as weekly aggregate limits. And in fact, we are in agreement, we understand that in order for people to make it these days, they have to maximize every trip. They have to go out there and you know, and really make, you know, that gas they're burning count for every bit it can. Well, to do that, we need to have good accountability, and this is one of the tools that we think we need to enact these regs. You know, if we're gonna allow a weekly possession limit, we need to have some sort of, you know, some sort of accountability measure here that when people are coming in, that they have documented what's on the trip to basically to discourage cheating. One of the other reasons that we do want to go to a prior to landing, and this is for a recall, we really, you know, a lot of times the logbooks will come in and it will be the same number of hours fished for the whole thing. We really want to get the actual stats from the trip. We don't want this done all at once, you know, on Thanksgiving weekend and handed in to us, or, you know, typed in the computer all at once. We want these trips to be accurate. We want the data to be accurate. So we just feel that if you've documented it prior to landing, that's the best way you know exactly what's going on to the trip. I will say that we did get some very legitimate comments about, once again, open crafts, center console boats, and safety at sea issues. That it would be very difficult to, you know, document the trip if it was bad weather, you're single-handed out there. We totally understand that, and we actually came up with this option 2, which is to document the trip within 3 hours of landing. So we did get some comments saying that, well, how do you know it was 3 hours that I documented it? Once again, and to say, so document is simply recording. This isn't submission. So submission electronically is putting it into the computer and hitting send. Submission with a logbook is actually putting it in the mail and mailing it to us. This is just to document. So what we're saying here is, okay, we get it. You were out there, it was snotty. You couldn't you couldn't document before you landed. Come in and land. You have 3 hours. You're tied up to the dock. You got time now. Document away. So it's not, I think there's a concept that we're doing this to get people. That's not the case. We do want to improve accountability for hopefully an aggregate landing program coming down the pipe, but we also want to improve the quality of the data by lessening any recall bias that's out there.
Thanks. Anything further? I mean, that lays that. So is there a preferred option that the division has between these two? Or are these both being offered as viable options?
They're both viable. You know, the second one happened after the comments, the storming out of the room kind of stuff that went on over this particular item. So we're trying to find some compromise. So either one would work. I guess if you're asking which would be my fave, it would be that first one. I think that's the one that's easiest to enforce. You know, it's much clearer. The 3 hours gets squirrelier, which I agree with those comments, but trying to find a balance, that was all.
Thanks. Questions on this issue? Andy?
Could we put like upon landing instead of prior to landing, for the same problem that everybody's talking about, these small boats and stuff? Let them get tied up to the dock and then do it. I know for hardly, we have to have, upon landing, we have to have the logbook filled out or tablet done or whatever, then we have 2 days to send it in. But, it's kind of tough, you know, guys come in at 2 o'clock in the morning, let them get tied up and then do it.
It's certainly in the spirit of option 2, but a little bit more defined, if you will, you might say, to use the word upon. So interesting suggestion. Jeff?
So I've got a kind of 2 parts comments here. One, I agree with either 1 or 2 for any aggregate programs. It's necessary to do aggregate programs. However, when it's not aggregate, it's just more paperwork, and it's, you know, trying to get things done in a time frame that might not be convenient or, you know, work for people. Another question is, so when you're talking about this documented, are you talking in your logbook or on your tablet? Is it, or either, I'm just saying, you know, is that what we're talking? Like, cause I mean, you talk about like, if I write on this piece of paper that I really, you know, I'm coming in with this many, you know, whatever, does that count? Or are we talking in the logbook or your,
So that is a very fair point, and that's something that we have discussed, that we do need to lay out standards of what documentation is. So certainly the tablets do have the ability, when you put it in the tablet, it holds it there. So when you submit your tablet, it's usually over Wi-Fi. Obviously, there's not Wi-Fi out on the water, so it's in there. The tablet holds it in its memory. That would be documenting the trip. Writing it down in a logbook would also be documented on the trip. Now, can you write it down on the side of the wheelhouse? I don't know. We need to vet that one out.
So my next thing is like so it has to do with, it's not exactly this, but it's the difference between electronic reporting and having the paper books. So two people go out and one of them has electronic reporting and the other one has a logbook. Neither of them have filled out one thing. They fished all year. They haven't filled out anything. They're the people that fill it all on the weekend. Guy with the paper logbook, DEM comes on, logbook, they don't have it or it's not filled out, they're in violation. The guy with the electronic reporting, they just look at their license, say electronic reporting and say, okay.
No, so our enforcement officers have access to this database.
Do they now? Okay.
I'm not sure how reliable it is out on the water, but certainly on shore, they can pull up anyone's record and see exactly where they stand electronically.
Okay, is that new? Because a couple of years ago, I don't know if that was the case.
It's always been possible. I think now it's been explored more.
Okay, do they do that?
I won't speak for them. I know it's not. I won't speak for enforcement. I know.
So, Chris?
I have just a further question about the definition of documented. So does documented mean you're basically filling in the draft of your report for that trip, but you're just not submitting it? Is that what it means to document the trip?
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is to accommodate people, this is kind of related to another rule that we're proposing. And so this is basically, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So to document this, let me start over. So can you ask your question again? I'm sorry.
What I want to get at, what I don't see here, and it might be someplace else, is documented defined someplace? Will people know that documented essentially means you're filling out your trip report, you're just not submitting it. You're saying where you went, you're saying how many hours you were out there, you're saying what fish you were pursuing, whatever else happens to go into the report.
Yes, absolutely. So that goes back to our need to create a standardization process. So we can say, we want you to record this, and minimally you must record these 5 things.
So what's the council's pleasure? How would you like to proceed? Perhaps with a motion recommending an approach, either perhaps one of the, well, we have status quo, which would be before the start of the next trip, or 2 variations on that, options 1 or 2, and then Andy, you had suggested, I think even a 3rd variation, which would be upon landing. So,
I guess just another quick
yeah,
question.
sure.
Do we have to make a final decision tonight for this to be enacted? I mean, what's the guideline? I think there's a lot of confusion on the documented word, and I don't think you're gonna come through that in the next 2 minutes here, so.
I think it's certainly going to be part of the council's recommendation to the director that, that documentation needs to be clarified, defined, perhaps in conjunction with a motion pertaining to it or in lieu of. That's really up to the council in terms of what you would like to recommend to the director as to how she should proceed with regard to this issue and the way it's been presented. Jason?
As with many of these things, I still consider Westbury the red-headed stepchild of Rhode Island Fisheries, but we have no facilities. So our fish don't even get landed. We drive to Point Judith or Calitri picks it up for us. This time of year, Dan doesn't come down. So today's a perfect example. Leave the dock at 6, go fish off of Weekpog, get the hell kicked out of you the whole ride home, go to the dock, offload your fish, and then drive it to Point Judith. So our day started at 6, I think it ended at 3. There's a lot, documenting is about the last thing on my mind about writing down what I caught in my logbook after getting beat up all day. Because we're a very different group down there. There is, I think, only 1 boat's over 30 feet. There's 30 boats under 30 feet. A lot of guys aren't even fishing right now, but those of us that have to. This could be interesting, and it brings me along to, is this going to be another piece of selective enforcement? Because, as I say to a lot of people, I'm getting younger every day. So the bulging discs in my back weren't happy coming around Watch Hill Reef this afternoon. So I'm not thinking about writing down what I caught. I know I have 50 pounds of sea bass and I'm going to drive to town dock, but I think we should table it because, again, documenting, it leaves for way too loose terminology when it comes to whether or not it's gonna be an enforceable matter. You write down that you have 50 pounds of sea bass, but we all know when you get to the fish house, you have 53 pounds of sea bass and it's still 50 pounds of sea bass at the fish house. But if it's weighed on your boat at 53 pounds, you say you have 50, is that a violation? I mean, I think there's a lot of room for fishermen to get screwed. And I mean, to put it simply, on an enforcement end. But I think there's more to this than what we're reading up there. You know, maybe we need to require a logbook that is not documentation to be sent to the DEM, but every day maybe you have to record like a charter boat does. Even prior to doing the electronic reporting, I think all charter boats had to record what you caught that day. But I mean, it wasn't a legal document, but it was at least a record of it. Because I think it opens up, well, a lot of other questions. I've had this discussion with most of the guys that fish out of Western. It's a different fishery, yet we're under the same guidelines as everyone else. And it's a whole different game. You know?
Appreciate that perspective. Chris?
So my understanding from John's explanation is the purpose of this proposal is to improve the data quality about how fishing takes place in this state so that better decision-making can be made about, you know, limits or season lengths or whatever it happens to be. And most people, I think, would agree that the further from the event that you document something, the less precise your documentation is. And so what I think the department's after here is to try to get that documentation to take place when the information is likely to be as correct as possible. And I'm very sensitive to Jason's situation is, I don't get the impression that in this particular instance, the department is looking for something that is meant to provide enforcement opportunities, but rather to have the fishermen provide the best quality information necessary to help manage the fishery. So, you know, one of the issues is I think, you know, if you want this to happen, you have to take it would be good to take the hammer out of it, that you make it very clear that this is a data quality issue and not, I'm trying to trap somebody into saying they had 50 pounds of fish when they had 55 pounds of fish or whatever it happens to be. And I'm just trying to stimulate the conversation so we can get to a good decision here.
Good point. A couple hands are up. Let me go to Jeff. Let me go to Jason first, then I'm going to go to Jeff.
Yeah, it's directly to Chris's. So I totally agree with what you just said, in particular from the marine fishery standpoint. That's all, you know, we're interested in that data quality aspect. But there is an accountability aspect to it as well. Not trying to create situations that are going to get people in trouble, but to create opportunities for progressive management strategies. So that's kind of the other, that's that accountability aspect, which, you know, does interact with enforcement, where they can know when they go on the boat, there should be documentation of that trip. Again, I totally get what Jason is talking about too, and I'm not looking to, one of the things that got talked about at the public hearing was, well, I'm bass fishing, I'm getting to the dock at 1, I'm not filling out my logbook at 1:15, you know, I get all that, so they're good arguments. I'm really curious to see what you guys do with this one.
Jeff Grant?
So just to expand on that, I see this, the reason you would need this, and it would be either option 1 or Andy's proposal, is for aggregate things. That's where we would need that to go to, you know, if we went to summer flounder or sea bass aggregate. Me personally, I would want one, or, you know, a pond landing something like that for aggregate. For the rest of the stuff, it just becomes an extra burden. So I don't support it for everything. I would support it for, you know, when participating in species with aggregate limits, these are the reporting requirements, higher reporting requirements other than prior to the next landing.
So I think it's been a great discussion. I think it seems like there's a few different possible directions the council might want to go in, and I'm going to look to someone to make a motion. It could be recommending adoption of at least 2 or 3 different approaches that have been presented. As well, there seems to be at least some interest in postponing consideration of the issue pending, clarification of what documentation means. Those are the sorts of things I've been hearing discussed, and I think at this point I'd like to get a motion on the table to see if we can get a recommendation. Mike Rice?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion, and my motion is to recommend option 2 with the proviso that there be further clarification and firming up of the term documentation.
Is there a second to that motion? Second by Andy D'Angelo. So moved by Mike Rice and second by Andy D'Angelo to recommend adoption of option 2 with the caveat that if that were to move forward, the term documented would need to be further clarified to make it clear as to what that means. So that's the motion. Discussion on the motion. Travis?
I kind of like Andy's suggestion of the upon landing, but I think the 3 hours is super wishy-washy.
Well, I mean, it's a fair comment, and depending on how you want to proceed, you can either vote the motion up or down, or you could offer a substitute motion. So it's really up to the council now in terms of how you want to proceed with this. I'm open to further discussion or amendments to the motion, or I'm ready to call a vote on it. What would you like to do? Any further thoughts? You ready for the question then? Okay, so we'll vote on the motion, which is the motion by Mike Rice, seconded by Andy, to recommend option 2 with the caveat that the further clarification be given to what documented means. All in favor of that motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. 3 in favor. Opposed? 3 opposed. Abstentions? That would be everyone. All right, so it's 3. It fails on a 3-3 vote, which means we're up for another motion if anyone would like to make it, or we can move on. Would anyone like to make another motion? The motion has failed for lack of a majority, and at this point there's nothing moving forward to the director with a recommendation. Chris Ryan?
I hope this is a proper motion, but I would make a motion that our recommendation is that Marine Fisheries go ahead and prepare that definition of documentation, and then we bring it back to the council for a vote as to whether or not to approve it, at the next meeting or soon hereafter subsequent meeting.
So I'm going to take that to mean postpone consideration of this issue pending,
But recommend that the term documentation be clarified
first before returning to this
and then
issue.
bring it back.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mike Rice. Moved by Chris Ryan, seconded by Mike Rice, that this item be postponed and revisited along with clarified language regarding what documentation means. So that seems pretty clear in terms of the nature of the motion. We've discussed this quite a bit. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor of the motion, raise your hand. It's unanimous, 7-0. Okay, so that'll be the recommendation. That'll move forward to the director. Thank you very much. I think that really got the thorough vetting that we expected, and I know we have at least 1 or 2 more issues to work through now, and we're on to the next issue, whatever that is. Pete?
This is the proposed additional reporting requirements for party charter vessels. We talked about it with the council, and John can add some information to this.
Sure. So right off the bat, I want to say we're going to encounter the same issues with documentation here as we did with the last slide. And it is something that we do. I completely agree with the council. It does need to be worked out on our end. That's on me. But basically this regulation is something that we would like to come into the same step as the NOAA Fisheries. They are now requiring any party charter vessel that holds a mid-Atlantic species permit to document their trips electronically in the safest system. These trips are made either on a mobile application that can be done on board the vessel. It's called eTrips-M. There are actually some other commercial applications out there as well if people wanted to buy one of those. eTrips-M is a free piece of software that is provided by the ACCSB. The other option for the federal, and we are proposing the same, is for people to have the ability to make a trip and then submit their report, that is, go in, put it into the computer and hit the send button there within 48 hours. And this is where documentation would come into play. We would need those trips to be documented prior to landing, upon landing. I like upon landing. So that would be that. So, and then the one thing that is different than the federal rule that we are proposing in Rhode Island is negative reports. We did get some pushback on negative reports, very good comments that we don't want to set up a system that's very different than the federal system. I agree, but I also have a lot of trepidation implementing a regulation that's going to affect the state-only party charter fleet, which largely we don't encounter as much as those that are federally permitted. Generally, a state waters party charter vessel is likely going to be trailered or not at the more popular tie-up spots where the majority of the fleet does, for example, in Galilee. So really, we don't, aside from us encountering these vessels in our general interview process, we really don't know a lot about them, except that they have a license. One thing about our party charter license, it is very cheap. It's $25 for 2 years. There are no, it's the same for non-resident and for resident. All you have to do is have a valid OUPV license, and meet all the requirements for that. In our regs, we mirror those, saying you have to be in a drug program. So if we're going to implement this, how do I know that if the federal guys, you guys are easy to find. We know you guys are making trips or not. These other boats, we're not so sure. So I did leave this negative reporting requirement in there, but only once a year. So if you got the license and you're not making for-hire trips, you're not having people pay to be on your boat to go fishing, then at the time of sending out a compliance letter, we'll give you the opportunity to make a negative report for the year. If you have made even one trip during that year and it's in our computer system and we see it, we got it. We assume that you've reported for the year. So that would be the only difference between the federal rule. We did get some good comments from the Rhode Island Party Charter Association, which one was talking about that negative report and how we would set it up. And actually a good one was, can the electronic system accommodate that? And I'll be honest, I'm fairly certain it can, because I know it can in the commercial electronic logbook. However, I will have to look into the party charter specific logbook, whether you can put in a negative report like that. I'm fairly certain you can, because these things are all modularized, they're all built on top of each other. So I'm not too concerned about that. The other comment that we did have from the Party Charter Association was about documentation. What is required for documentation? I agree wholeheartedly. We should have worked that out before bringing that before you guys, and we will work diligently on it before the next meeting for sure. The other comments from the Party Charter Association were in support of the regulation.
Thanks. Anything to add, Jay, or did I cover it? Okay. Thanks to the council for questions or comments. Motion, Andy?
Let's make a motion that we go along with this proposal with a couple of changes, maybe. Number 2, where it says prior to the end of the trip, again, upon landing. And then the question of documentation part of it too.
So is it so let me just make sure. So you're recommending adoption of this proposed language with the caveat that under number 2, it would be documented upon landing rather than prior to the end of the fishing trip, and then as well you want to make sure documented is clarified.
Yes.
As to what it means. So that's the motion. Is there a second to that motion? seconded by Jason Jarvis. So moved by Andy D'Angelo, seconded by Jason Jarvis. Discussion on the motion? Travis?
I assume that the documentation verbiage will be the same as.
I suspect it'll be very similar to the commercial documentation with maybe a few little idiosyncrasies in that, party charter count anglers, they don't count rods, just basically tailor it to the reporting requirements.
But maybe ask just that this be brought back to the council, not for maybe any motion, but just for reference when that's clarified.
Makes sense. Yep. Well,
I'd be happy to.
That'd be something we can definitely do. But it doesn't sound like it's contingent.
No.
Okay, all right, thanks, Travis, good suggestion. Additional, discussion, any further discussion on the motion? Council ready for the question? If so, all in favor, raise your hand. And it's unanimous, thanks very much. And, just so you, Pete, I know you and Jason were doing a sidebar, but Travis asked that if this moves forward, the director agrees to adopt, that the language be brought back before the council so that the council's clear on what was decided.
That's what we were discussing,
Okay.
actually. We will certainly do that, and we have to talk to Christina about whether we're gonna actually have to go back out of hearing with something that's significant. So we'll work through that and report back to you.
Thanks, great. All right, next, number 11.
The last one.
Next.
Proposed change clarification of procedure regarding the appeal of a license denial due to medical hardship. Again, we believe we're just, mostly just syncing the reg up with the actual process and being consistent with what the statute says. I won't read all those bullets there. Another comment from Ken, some concerns about this relative to appealing for, that this is specific, provides for an appeal only in this case, concern that what about appeal for other kinds of license denial? So our answer is that this is what the statute says, that the appeal is only allowed in this case, so.
So this is essentially syncing up the regulatory language with the current statutory provisions.
There was a lot wrong with the process, a lot wrong with the language, with how it was worded in the process. So this is clarifying the exact process.
And again, syncing it up with statute, since the Commercial License Review Board is no longer in statute, it was eliminated in 2016 at all, in terms of the other places. So it sounds like
just in response to Ken, it's statute, what these, this is what the statute says. Appeal is allowed in this case.
Questions, comments on this proposal?
What were the comments on this one?
That was just from Ken saying, this concerns me that an appeal is only allowed for this instance, this type of situation.
Okay. And the response is that he's right, and his concern, if he's, to the extent that his concern has validity, it has to do with the statute, not the regulation. Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion on this? Travis?
Motion to accept.
Is there a second? Second. Seconded by, I'll go with Jeff Grant. So moved by Travis Sparrow, seconded by Jeff Grant to recommend adoption of the proposal. Discussion on the motion? Is council ready for the question? If so, all in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous to recommend adoption, and I think that covers all of the public hearing items. All right, wonderful. That was a big chunky agenda item, but we got through it. Thanks, good job. Now we'll have a brief overview of what was not yet addressed by way of the Industry Advisory Committee meeting on August 21. I know it was a very lively meeting. There was a lot of focus on licensing issues, all of which now have been essentially covered, so there's no need to go over that. But Chris or John, were there other issues that came up that you want to bring before the council for discussion or consideration?
I guess I'll just reinforce a couple of things. There were several discussions about exit entry ratios, and it's pretty clear there was a bit of a division in the room about wanting to make them more liberal, to allow more entry into the fishery. And so without putting my own opinion or judgment on it, I think that we as a group, the council and Marine Fisheries, need to put some hard thought into that, because the guys that are on the IAC by and large are mature adults, been around a long time. We just have a new, and Spencer was here earlier, but you know, he's the youngest guy in the IAC by a long margin, and you know, there's a real concern by some of the guys like Jerry and Bob that, you know, this is a dying industry because we can't stimulate more people, more young people to be in it. And yet, the flip side of that coin is, well, you know, if we bring more people into an industry where we already don't have enough product for them to catch and bring to market, what good is that? You know, so I think I'm restating things that people have all heard, but we spent quite a lot of time under various topics addressing that same issue. So I think just that's an important thing for people to understand that's going on within the membership of the IAC. And then there was also, you know, a pretty strong opinion about this whole issue about the documentation too, about when it could be done, and a lot of sentiment along what Jason said about, you know, it might be easy for some of us who have a desk job to talk about making documentation at the end of your workday, but it's a little different when you're an actual fisherman that's endured a lot of physical hardship during the day. That being said, you know, I'll go back to what I said earlier, and again, this was part of the discussion at the IAC, but people recognize the need for documentation. They just, the actual fishermen find it to be a hardship to make them document things at the end of a very busy and sometimes physically demanding workday, or maybe often physically demanding workday. So I think, John, is there any other big ticket items you think that came out of the IAC that we should?
Yeah, sure. I would just mention two items that we were, so one thing Pete and I have been really trying to get the IAC process honed in and very efficient. Last year, we actually had a workshop in May to try to solicit some proposals so we could get working on them early, and that way we could get them queued up for this meeting here. While we did get some proposals at that workshop, we generally tend to get some at the IAC meeting itself. Unfortunately, we can't act on them for right away because we have to go through the process. So we did get two suggestions. One was to change the upgrade time, the time needed to upgrade a student shellfish to a CFL license. Right now, it's you have to hold a student shellfish license for 2 years. There's a suggestion from the group to change that to 1 year. So we will be taking that up next year as a licensing issue. The other one, I'm not sure if we have to wait till next year, or if it can be addressed in the coming cycles, and that would be to change scup to a non-restricted species year-round. We currently have it as a restricted species during the summer and a non-restricted species during the winter periods. So that would be another one. That one is in the licensee's regs, but it's also in the species regs, so it's kind of intermingled between the two. So I would look to my colleagues to see if we could, when we can address that one. And then the other thing we discussed was the exit-entrance ratios and the number of licenses issued for quahog and softshell clam. Like Chris said, there was a lot of discussion on it. However, we did wind up at status quo for quahog and for softshell clam. Quahog has a 1-to-1 exit-to-entry ratio. We had 32 licenses non-renewed. That would result in 33 quahog licenses being issued for next year. That's the same number we issued this year. Softshell clam, we had 27 that were not renewed. That's at a 5-to-1 exit-entrance ratio, meaning 5 leave, 1 goes in. That will result in 6 licenses being issued for next year.
Thanks, John. So clearly on the student shellfish issue, that would have to wait till the next licensing cycle. On the restricted, on the issue of scup as a restricted species, Jason, you have a thought on how that might?
Yeah, so it was clearly appropriate for the IAC to recommend that, and we would have, you know, put it into the notice, except that one of the more parliamentary astute people at the IAC tabled it, and so there was no clear guidance from the IAC as to whether they wanted that to move forward, which is why we didn't. Remember that,
Yeah.
Chris?
And actually, if I may,
Yeah, please.
you know, having now presided over a couple of these IAC meetings, I have the personal feeling that, you know, it might not be a bad idea to try to have an earlier in the year IAC meeting followed up by a meeting closer to the hearing, so that some of this stuff that comes up at the last minute, which these guys often like to do, they start to think like, well, here's a problem that I've been worrying about, let's see if we can solve it. But with an IAC meeting in August, you just don't have any time to really react to that. So I am contemplating that perhaps we might try to have might try to have 2 IAC meetings next year, or have some initial early on correspondence so that we make sure that we flesh out all the issues that people want to talk about on the agenda, so that, you know, Jason and others are prepared to try to deal with it when we make decisions there.
Sounds like a good plan. Jason?
Yeah, no, we like the plan too, and I think there's a couple of different versions that we could do. So the reason we went with a workshop was to kind of widen the audience with that first one, but what we were talking about is a hybrid where we require the IAC, or, you know, we hold it as an official IAC meeting, but hold it a concurrent workshop so we can get other folks in the room at the same time to get some other proposals, and then the one closer to the hearing will be the official,
Right.
you know, IAC. So there's other different ways we can do it.
So we need to work that out before next spring.
Okay, and it sounds like the 2 issues that were mentioned that might be good to sort of tee up for next year then in that new cycle,
Sure.
or in that new way.
I think, if
Yeah.
I may, so the scup one, there was no clear, the way they had managed it, you know, I felt comfortable, that was not clear. The student shellfish one, I think what we decided was there's a statutory interaction there, and that's why we didn't put that one in this package. But we will investigate like what exactly that would take to fix that.
Good responses there. Okay, anything else? If not, is there any I guess I'll need a motion to just simply receive the meeting minutes and place them on file from the IAC meeting. We'll do that for the SAP as well. Pretty straightforward administrative. So Chris, would you like to make that
Sure,
motion?
I'll make that
Is there
motion.
a second by Andy? Any objection? Seeing none, those meeting minutes will be received and placed on file. And now we're on to item 8, which is the Shellfish Advisory Panel meeting summary from September 5th. Jeff or Connor, if one of you want to jump on that?
I can't, just
Sure.
one thing, I don't mean to go backwards, but I thank John for bringing it up, I had it written down here. We didn't go through the exit entry ratios for cohort, soft shell clam, and whelk licensing.
Well, we sort of implicitly we did.
Is that in the management, sector management plans, is that what we're?
So I think I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So I think the idea there, Jeff, was we didn't get any guidance other than what was noticed, and it's all status quo, I think.
I'm good with that, I just wanna make sure we're not running into a situation where we're going, there's no decision made.
So I think by you guys not taking action, status quo goes forward.
Right. And the fact that they're in the sector management plan as well means they essentially have been recommended to adopt.
John brought it up, like.
No, it's a good point. We had talked about that, you
That's
know,
fine.
as to how best to handle it. The thinking is if it's status quo and there's no recommendations to change it, they get plugged in, and unless there's no need to kind of go through each one.
So I can do the Shellfish Advisory Panel real quick.
Beautiful.
We met September 5th, it was a nice short meeting. We discussed one aquaculture lease application for Westcott in the East Passage. That was objected to. I can detail that in the next item. And then we talked about the winter harvest management area scheduling. And there was a recommendation to change the default for Bristol Harbor management area. And we can go through that in the next, the next 2 points will be those things.
Okay. Now, did you have a quorum at that
There was
meeting?
not a quorum, but we rarely have one.
Okay.
I think it's important, we need to hold the meeting to get the information out.
Understood. So, any questions for Jeff regarding that? And as he indicated, and we'll go back to approve. Just so I don't forget, would you like to make a motion, Jeff, as chair, just to receive the meeting minutes and place them on file?
Yes.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Jason Jarvis. Any objections? Seeing none, those meeting minutes will be received and placed on file. We're going to be returning to them under both of the next 2 items. I just want to make sure, is there any other discussion on item 8? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, which is the the very aquaculture lease application that was brought before the Shellfish Advisory Panel, proposed by Mr. John Westcott. Is he here? Yes, hi, John, welcome. And I know Dave Patel's here for the CRMC. Let's see, first of all, we need, do we have a presentation on this? Is Connor or somebody planning to give a brief overview, or is, I'm sorry.
Is it on this or not? I don't
No,
I guess I'm just looking to bring this before the council now. Who would be best able to present the application? I could look to Dave or you.
I mean, Dave can provide the background on the site and what the applicant's proposing to do. Jeff and I can summarize the discussion at the SAP. And then, if others in the audience want to iterate some of the concerns that were raised at the SAP, that's fine as well.
Let's do it that way. Thank you for keeping me on track. Dave, it's to you to give a brief presentation on the application for the council.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's for a 3-acre site, using cages on the bottom that are in trawls of 15, so you have to 20 trawls of 15 cages. So a maximum of 300 oyster cages. The water depth ranges from the inshore section at mean low water is 7 feet deep, and the offshore section at mean low water is 20. We did a site assessment for quahogs and came up with 0.5 quahogs per square meter. That's a low density. The also proposed is a wintertime kelp activity which would occur in the same site over top of the bottom cages, and would begin on November 1 and be end by May 1, and all the kelp here would be removed at that time.
Mr. Westcott, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Well, yes, actually, I would. There were some items brought up at the SAP meeting, and if I may, I just have some photos to address some of the issues that were brought up. Sorry, I don't have enough for everybody, but it's pretty simple if you guys just want to take a peek at it. This is the actual Portsmouth shoreline. One of the issues, it's just two copies of it. One of the issues that was brought up was that there may be a public access or boat ramp in the area. That photo actually shows the shoreline, and the proposed site is about 300 feet off that shoreline. And that shows there's actually a golf course along there, and there's no boat ramps, there's no really public access there at all. As well as if you look deeper into the photos, there's quite a few rocks along the area there. So that addresses one issue that was brought up as far as public access, as well as there was an issue brought up regarding public or commercial quahogging or clamming in the area. I spoke to several local quahoggers, and one of them actually laughed at me and said, "There's no quahogs there anyway, man, do whatever you want." And so that as far as that's concerned, whether it's recreational or commercial quahogging or clamming, it doesn't appear, especially based on the CRMC, that it would be impacted. There was also a mention at the SAP meeting, well, I don't have to hand this to you guys, you have it's outlined right in that, it's that little green speck inside the white rectangle. Initially looking at this, I looked at moving in between the red marks, which would be south of, below the green dot. Those are existing aquaculture farms. I looked at an area in between those red areas, and just, thank you, based on some feedback, decided it would be better to move it, it's approximately a mile north from the top lease, that top red mark. So it was mentioned that the farms would be too clumped together if they were all there, but in fact, that's not really an issue at all, because like I said, I initially looked at going there, but decided to go a mile north. So again, another issue that was brought up, that the farms would be far too clumped together, actually doesn't exist, because that's not what I'm proposing. So that was another issue that was brought up that I wanted to address. There was also brought up that there's a local whelk fisherman who apparently got some of their gear caught in my marker buoys that are out there. Now the marker buoys are, well, they're just that, they're pretty clear. I mean, they're bright yellow. They're 300 to 400 feet apart. And the reason I handed this out to you is the little red squares along the shoreline here, if you look, these are rocks. It's a very rocky area. Through here. The proposed site is approximately here. Again, you can make a comparison. Proposed site is approximately here. These are rocks there. I'm certainly not suggesting the individual didn't catch his gear on something. Why would you say he did if he didn't? But given that these marker buoys are 300 to 400 feet apart, they're very clearly marked, and there's a lot of rocks in this area. Those rocks are the exposed ones. I also scuba dive. I dove this site twice over the summer. I didn't make a map of it, just to get an idea of what I would be dealing with potentially on the ground. And it's a very craggy area. It's a very rocky area. So I would just suggest that, perhaps the individual didn't catch up on my gear. Perhaps it was just a rock on the bottom, because like I said, it is a very craggy area. Also, I had been in the area 2 weeks prior to the meeting on the 5th. I learned of this on the 5th. The buoys I went out to check them to make sure they didn't walk or get moved or I mismeasured anything, and they were in the same spots where I dropped them. I didn't have any pictures of this individual getting caught in my gear. I wasn't notified. I don't know when the day was, but the point was made that if these marker buoys are a hindrance to this individual, more gear would be more of a hindrance. My point is that this area, I believe, is very rocky, very craggy. I don't know who this individual was or where they typically fish, but it doesn't seem that this area is particularly conducive to dragging the trawl gear or hauling pots up off of this. I feel it would be for the aquaculture farm because it's dropping ideally straight down. And again, I can always check the bottom, check my gear by diving down and actually looking at it. So those were some of the objections that were made to this proposal. These are my feelings and the facts to them, and I believe I addressed every one of them quite reasonably. So,
Thank you for that. If we have any further questions, I appreciate your availability to respond.
Absolutely.
With that, we'll go back to the council and potentially Connor. Jeff, do you want to offer any additional, do you want to summarize the staff concerns, I guess many of which the applicant may have already spoken to, but do you want to go over some of
Yep,
that?
so the motion was made to object. It was a unanimous decision to object to the lease based on the wild harvest fisheries. The main component was the last one he spoke to, which was the effect on the commercial whelk fishing that takes place in the area.
Okay. Connor, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Just that from the meeting, it was noted the whelk fishery concerns were both mentioned in note to Dave prior to the meeting from individuals not part of the staff as well as during the meeting. And it was specific to the whelk fishery, less so co-op and other fisheries.
Okay. And has the division offered a recommendation on this yet, on this particular application? I'm just curious as to whether there's a.
Yes.
Yes, they have, okay. And
No objection.
No objection from the division. On the division side of the ledger, this is of course just a recommendation to CRMC, so now it's before the Marine Fishery Council for consideration and a recommendation on the wild fishery impacts, potential or actual, as the council sees it. So with that, I'll open it up to the council for discussion or a motion. Chris?
My apologies, but I had to step out while Jeff was making his initial report. So can either Jeff, can you explain, or Dave, somebody, the whelk conflict? I mean, what is the real or perceived conflict with?
So whelk fishing occurs, the baited pots, cube pots, they're baited, fished on either singles or trawls. Some fishermen fish one or the other or both, a combination of both. And there was, the point was brought up at the SAP that the marker buoys, so when they go to preliminary determination or the 30-day notice, they're required to put the marker buoys where they fished, and one of the marker buoys said that was hung up in one of the fishermen's trawls. So that's where the impetus started.
With the council's pleasure, I would like to proceed on formulating a recommendation to the CRMC on this application. You're welcome to anyone's welcome to make a motion, anyone's welcome to follow up with any questions to CRMC or the applicant. Chris?
So maybe to Dave, does whelk fishing continue, or Jeff, does whelk fishing continue down further south where those other aquaculture leases are currently active?
So the
So I see the.
So the East Bay whelk fishermen,
Yeah.
I worked with them, created a map, as we're working on the Narragansett Bay Special Area Management Plan, and what they claimed was that the entire shoreline of every piece of land in Narragansett Bay and the Secana River is whelk territory.
Understood. And have you?
That map is not yet public, but it will be when we have released the base sample.
So maybe going back to Jeff or anybody that could answer, Connor. So these other aquaculture leases that are further south of the proposed lease, have there been any evidence of tampering with other uses, including whelk fishing?
It has been reported to me from the other aquaculture sites that they have worked with the whelk fishermen to have the whelk fishermen set single whelk traps within their lease area, and that they have successfully cooperated to do that.
We have Katie Egan here, who represents East Bay whelk fishing interests. Would the council like to hear from Katie on this issue? Katie?
So I'm also on the staff, and I'm a whelk fisherman. It was brought up to me by the individual whose gear was caught up in his buoy with the cinder block, apparently. So the trawl was already set and in this spot when Mr. Westcott dropped his cinder block to mark his future lease site or application site. And so that's how it was already there before he put it down there. So he just probably didn't know what to look for, and it's really difficult. If you don't know how to read here, you don't know what you're looking at. The one thing that's unique about Mr. Westcott's site is because it's such a rocky, it's like a small rocky point basically, and it's to the north of a long dock and a couple moorings. He's like maybe 100 feet from the closest mooring. But along that whole shoreline, it's more like a very gradual, rocky, small rock, pebbly rock shoreline. And that one spot is the one kind of bouldery rock spot. And I don't know if you guys know much about whelk fishing, but there are certain times of the year where the whelk just really get like rocky hard bottoms are where they congregate, and that's where you fish really hard. Right now is that time. So where his site is proposed to be is gonna pretty much eliminate the only very unique spot on that shoreline. And there are 3 more farms to the south, and you can't tell by the scale of that, or you can't tell how it looks, when you're out on the water, because you're looking at the chart there. But the fishermen have to essentially fish around them. There have been interactions, not as peaceful as Dave has implied, with between fishermen and the other aquaculturists in the area. And adding one more farm is just going to add more congestion, and also eliminate a very unique fishing ground from that entire shoreline. The whelk fishermen do fish, like Dave's saying, basically everywhere where the whelks are. But this shoreline, now one more chunk of this shoreline is going to be eliminated from the existing fishery. Which, I mean, it's up to you guys, but this one little rocky point it's 3 acres, and it covers a very wide tidal range of depth. So it will impact the fishery.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you. Back to the council for a motion on, or first,
I guess just a question for Mr. Westcott. Katie referenced that spot being large boulders and maybe a good spot for whelk this time of year. So, any reason not north or south of that?
Well, originally I did look south of that between the other farms, but it came to my attention not from any of the whelk fishermen actually, because I reached out to several of the weld fishermen on the East Bay and received basically, I can't say no, but very, very little response as far as how can I work with you? How can we coexist in this space? Because I don't have an interest in taking any money out of anybody's pocket. I simply have an interest in pursuing my ambition for an aquaculture farm and all of the benefits that come with it, not only to myself financially and providing a food source, but the benefits of the industry itself to the environment. And it came to my attention that there was a challenge because, well, now they're going to be all grouped together. I understood that the local aquaculturists there were willing to accommodate the fisheries and try to work with the fishermen, perhaps in an amended way to allow them to pursue their ambitions as well as keeping their farms there. So I did actually look further south. It came to my attention there was some contention to that because, well, now they're all two grouped together. So at this point, it's sounding as though it doesn't matter where I go, there's going to be an argument to it. This particular area, I chose it because you can see it's well protected in there. It is a very rocky, craggly area. Assuming that that would not be conducive to dragging or pulling pots. And also, like I said, I did start off between two of the existing farms and moved it in an effort to accommodate the local weld fishermen to begin with. Now it appears, and again, I tried to get feedback on the new place that I applied for and got none. No response at all. So how could I work with it if nobody's willing to have a dialogue? I hope that answers your question.
Yep. Thank you.
Travis, I would like to confirm that in the preliminary determination, it was recommended that he move north to separate from the other aquaculture leases because of comments from weld fishermen.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Take one more comment from Katie, and then I'd like to get a motion on the table. Katie?
Was there ever any comment on him actually moving to the south, like south of Melville? That was a comment, right?
Katie, I have not heard a word you have said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dave, when I reached out to Dave Aylesworth.
I still can't hear
The fisherman, Dave Aylesworth. I talked to him today. He said that he spoke with you multiple times on the phone and maybe an email, and you recorded the conversation. Was this?
In the preliminary determination, it was
Him, yeah.
that's where his comments were,
Mm-hmm.
which is why the recommendation was to move it based on specifically his comments.
To go to the north, not
Yes.
south. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we'll need a recommendation from the council. As the council knows, there is a statutory obligation for the council to issue a recommendation to the CRMC based on the council's determination as to whether the aquaculture activities proposed in the application are or are not consistent with competing uses engaged in the utilization of marine fisheries. So with that as the council's mandate, we do need a motion on this pending application.
Short comment, that's all.
Sure.
If you ever fish Watch Hill, there's so many different stakeholders using Watch Hill Reef. We all manage to do it. It's not easy, but I mean, we have scup pots, lobster gear, sea bass pots, rod and reel guys, charter vessels trolling. So it's, I mean, again, it comes back to something I've said in a few other meetings. A lot of stakeholders involved in a very small area. To hear that oyster lease will let somebody set gear in their lease, seems like at least a move in the right direction, because if you're setting lobster gear down in Watch Hill and scup pots or other trawls, you're losing a lot of gear down in Westerly. So I don't know,
My comment to you, Jason, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Is, they say that that's the case, but in reality, that's impossible.
What's that?
Setting gear through certain.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, because I don't
American
know. I don't
muscle-
understand if you can't.
No, you can if there's space wide enough, but there's no possible way to do it between the three farms. They're owned by two different people down south of this farm. You can't fish through those. And they said, oh yeah, you can fish through them. And then people did, and then cages got knocked over, and then now the leaseholder said, no more, I don't want any more gear through my lease. And this leaseholder is also Mr. Westcott's friend and mentor, why, which, like you said at the start, the reason why he wants to be on this shoreline is so he can be close to his friend and mentor. There are plenty of other shorelines in the state of Rhode Island for a 3-acre farm that would be completely acceptable. He wants to be close to his friend, and I get it, because it's his mentor, but, I mean, it's congested as it is. If you saw it, you'd be like, yeah, this is not reasonable. There's 3 farms in a row, basically, and then a long dock, a mooring field, then it'll be his farm, and then there's a commercial marina. So, you can't see it on this chart, but it's all there, and we all work together. And if we're gonna work together, you don't wanna start up on our own foot. That's just not how we work together. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, we do need a motion on the table in order to get through this, in order to address this issue. And so we'll look to somebody from the council to make a motion, at least to get, we've had good discussion, I was gonna say to get the discussion going, but to move through this issue. Would anyone like to make a motion? Realize it's a tough one, you've got 2 different perspectives here, and it sounds like it's a close call. From the body language that I sense around the table, but, I don't know, I mean, I've never known the council to pass on their responsibility to offer a recommendation, so I don't think no action is an option here. I think it's incumbent upon this council to make a recommendation.
I believe we've done it once in the past.
Pass, no recommendation? Well, if it's a tie vote, clearly, the tie vote would go forward as no recommendation. I don't know if I don't feel comfortable as chair, not at least attempting to offer a recommendation based on the information that's been presented. Chris?
So, I'm ready to make a motion, but I just wanna, because we don't do these every meeting. I have to make a motion that the proposed aquaculture farm is consistent with other marine fisheries usage in this area? Is that the?
That's the council's charge under the statute. I always bring that with me so that we don't veer off into a direction that might not be consistent with what the statute calls upon this council to do. So it really needs to be, doesn't have to be that exact language, although that tends to be the language we use in our letters to the CRMC. So I would suggest, something close to that, if not exactly. And again, it's an issue of whether or not, in the view of the council, based on the information that's presented to you, it's your recommendation that the application is or is not consistent with other competing uses. And in this case, the only information that's been presented would be whelk fishery. Because I haven't heard of any other fishery interests other than the commercial whelk fishery. So given what's been presented, given the representations from the applicant, we appreciate very much your input. I think it's time for a motion and a vote.
Well, I'll make the motion that we find that it is consistent with other marine fisheries usage in the area of the lease application.
Is there a second to that motion? Second. Seconded by Mike Rice. So moved by Chris Ryan and seconded by Mike Rice to recommend to the CRMC that the proposed Mr. Westcott's application is consistent with competing uses engaged in the utilization of marine fisheries in the area. We've had good discussion. Would anyone like to make any additional comments on the motion? Jeff?
So, prior to this, I tried to do my due diligence, and I tried to ask whelk fishermen who were not involved in this. So they weren't the East Bay guys, unfortunately, because I thought that was kind of skewing the results, whether or not they could fish in amongst not just aquaculture gear, but this aquaculture gear, the way it's laid out.
That's good. I'm glad you did that.
So I did that.
So what can you report?
I can report that I was told that, and I'm trying to, the exact quote was that it would severely hamper their ability to fish in the area, but not prevent it. So my next question for Dave is, I'm a little disappointed that, when we have an agreement that, the whelk fishermen could fish in the area, is a aquaculture lease holder able to prevent whelk fishermen from fishing in that area?
No, with the exception of if it entangles if it damages their gear, then yes. But unless the gear is continually entangled, then no, then the answer is
So, further discussion on the motion to recommend, to make the recommendation that Chris has offered? Is the council ready to vote? If so, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 4, opposed? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. So the motion passes 4-0 with 2 abstentions to recommend that the matter, that the application is consistent with competing uses. Obviously, we've had a very robust discussion tonight. I think it's clear, I'm just looking at you as the applicant, that there's very strong concerns from at least some segments of the commercial well fishery about potential impacts, and to the extent that you can work hard to accommodate those concerns and interests, I'm sure I speak for everyone up here, that would be something the council would strongly support and urge.
I tried at the beginning, I mentioned it again at the SAP, and I put it out there again. If any open dialogue that I can do to make life symbiotic for everybody in our area, while still being able to pursue my ambitions for an aquaculture farm, I am wide open to the discussion. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. I hope that your offer would be taken up. Is there any further discussion on this agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you very much for attending, both Mr. Westcott and Dave. Next is item 10, Bristol Harbor Shellfish Management Area Winter Harvest Schedule. I've got Connor listed here as somebody who can perhaps present this.
Sure. At the Shellfish Advisory Panel meeting for the Bristol Harbor Management Area, the winter harvest schedule was proposed as such. Closed for December, open 8 to noon Monday, Wednesday, Friday through January, and open daily, 7 days a week, sunrise to sunset, February to the end of April. This proposal has been adopted before in previous years. The last couple of years, we've had effectively the default schedule in effect. You can kind of go into, the division as a whole does not object to the proposal as is. However, Pete, you are the next slide, please. We just wanted to highlight to the council and those in attendance that what we see in this area is that the abundance for this management area is closely tied to the transplant efforts through time. So this is our dredge data for the area with just different years highlighted in different colors, and just giving you each line being a different sample taken. First bunch of lines are 2010, then 14, 16, and 18. And you can kind of see how abundances change depending on the intensity of the transplant in the area, with the funded transplant having higher abundances based on that effort, with volunteer transplants having some participation but not as much as the funded transplants, thus lower densities. And then in this past year, we did only do 3 tows that fell within this area, and they did have 0 abundance when we towed. Now, again, that's 3 samples taken of a quite large area, so it's likely not 0-0, but we just wanted to highlight that the abundance in this area is tightly connected, as it appears, to transplant effort. We did not have a transplant this past winter, while the division is not objecting to the proposal put forward by the industry, we will be looking at it closely over this next year to see what that has an effect on the area. And what we've also seen here for abundances closely matches to year's landings, both in landings, ex-vessel value, and participation annually. So we'll continue to look at all those data streams over the next year to see if that continues to indicate that without the transplant and the additional effort without the transplant, if we see a response. So.
Thanks. And Katie, since you're here, and I think you were backer of this proposal, if I'm not mistaken. If so, do you want to just speak briefly to the rationale for why you are proposing this?
It was brought up to me by volunteers for the transplant, that they liked how it worked back in 2016 to have it open and have it open more during, inclement weather traditionally, February. It's not a widely used, it's not used very much, especially, with, it directly correlates, like you said, with the usage also correlates with, a transplant, so there wasn't one this year, so, it's just another option for places for people to go, usually they go and scratch their heads and leave, but it's somewhere to go, during the weather.
And Jeff, this was discussed at the staff meeting?
So the SAP supported the change.
Okay. So this is, I guess, something that could potentially be addressed by the council this evening. It could be potentially revisited by the SAP, I suppose. I don't know, Jeff, what are your thoughts in terms of, is all the information on the table? Do you feel like it's?
So originally, Connor had talked, we talked at length about this, just from the division's perspective. And basically, my thought was if the division did not object to the change, that we would go through with the change. And if the division did object to the change, then we would find some way to kick it back to the SAP, but still keep December closed. But if they're not objecting to the change, and just want to monitor it, I would recommend, the default schedule be changed as the SAP recommended.
Okay. So, before we perhaps that's offered in the form of a motion. Are there any questions? We've heard from Connor, we've heard from Katie, we've heard from Jeff. Does the council have any questions on the matter? If not, Jeff, did you want to put forward a motion, or if you feel comfortable with
I
that?
have a question.
Oh, Pete.
So we're talking about amending it to this year, leaving the default in place. Is that what we're talking about?
No, I believe the request was to amend the default to this schedule and allow the default to go into effect for this year.
So do you want, do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, so I recommend to the director to change the default schedule for the Bristol Harbor management area to the following: close the month of December. I have it written down here, but I just want to make sure it's consistent with what you have. And then starting January, it'd be 1st, but closed on January 1st. So January 2nd, it's open Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 to 12. And then starting February 1st, open 7 days a week, sunrise to sunset, through the end of April. Is that what we have? Yeah.
That's what you got there,
Through April. So that's been offered in the form of a motion. Is there a second to that motion? Second. Seconded by Mike Rice. So moved by Jeff Grant, seconded by Mike Rice to recommend to the director adoption of that new schedule and discussion on the motion. Connor?
So just to clarify, so this is being proposed as the new permanent default schedule. And so next year, if the division or if there was to be an amendment, it wouldn't go back to what is currently the default. We'd be working off this as our new base.
Correct. That's what, I believe, I can ask Katie to make sure that is correct.
Yes.
That was the intent of the motion.
That's
Kind of, Jay, the division remains comfortable with this as a proposal. Okay, so that's the proposal before that's the motion before the council. Is there further discussion on that motion? Sure. My understanding is it's to recommend to the director that the new schedule for Bristol Harbor Shellfish management area be as follows: closed during the month of December, and then opening starting January 2nd, given the way the calendar is this year, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 to 12, through January, and then on beginning February 1st, moving to 7 days a week, sunrise to sunset, and then that's through April. So that would be the new default schedule for Bristol Harbor, as I understand the motion.
And then from April till
Closed.
It's closed.
So this is just the winter harvest schedules for the management areas. They often begin December-ish, right through April, and then close the rest of the year. So that's the proposal, is to make that change, starting effective this year. I assume the intent is that it would be closed this December.
That was the intent, was to change the default and allow the default to go into effect.
I think it makes good sense.
Okay. Got it. Nod of approval from Mike Rice. Any further discussion or comments? If not, is the council ready for the question? If so, all in favor, raise your hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you very much. And we're almost done. We've got one last issue, the two FYIs we're just gonna spend a few minutes on, but before we get to those, item 11, Deepwater Vineyard Wind offshore wind development. So just as a brief reminder, this is a follow-up to the council's, our last meeting on August 30th, which presentations were given on the wind energy development projects being proposed by both Deepwater Wind and Vineyard Wind. These matters are now back before the council on tonight's agenda for additional consideration and potentially the rendering of advice to the CRMC and or the DEM director. Meeting materials include links to the presentations and the council's meeting summary. And with that, it's really open now. I would open the floor to any discussion or recommendations from the council on how you'd like to proceed. We're bringing back the issue after hearing the presentations from August. At that time, it was not put forward as an action item for various reasons, but tonight it's back before the council for potential action in the form of recommendation. Chris Ryan?
So, to start the conversation anyway, those two particular projects, or those don't currently have plans to bring their transmission cables back through Rhode Island waters, and the wind energy areas themselves out in federal waters outside of Rhode Island state waters. And so and even though that's the case, I think it's important it's a good opportunity for this council to make recommendations or to CRMC and the director of DEM about participation in support of offshore wind energy. I wonder, my first question, Bob, is there anything that prevents us from doing that, since the current activities are not planned for Rhode Island state waters?
It's a great question. I don't think we've given it a whole lot of thought or analysis, except to say that I checked the statutes, and certainly the council does have, under your statutory charge, the opportunity to, there's a number of specific issues that the council is charged with addressing via advice to the director and or CRMC or any other state agency. And then there's that clause, or any other matter. So it's clearly, in my view, appropriate for the council to take it up as any matter that might affect Rhode Island's marine fishery interests. Moreover, as we heard from Jim Boyd from CRMC at the last meeting, there is a federal consistency determination that the CRMC is going to need to render on both projects, as I understand it. So there is that nexus, if you will, between state interests and federal water regulatory authority, such that it seems clear to me, and again, without having done a lot of analysis on this, and if anyone thinks we need to do more analysis, we can, but that this is certainly a matter that the council can offer, or can address in the form of a recommendation.
So, may I continue?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how many of my fellow council members know that I'm pretty close to the offshore wind industry, in that my day job is to do environmental impact analyses of offshore wind energy projects. So, while I could say a lot, I certainly don't want to monopolize the council or their time, but I would like to offer a few things for consideration. And one of the reasons that I believe that if the council is willing, that we might play a more active role in commenting on this industry, is that from participating in the offshore wind industry since 2001, I can tell you that the biggest technical issue that wind energy developers are faced with, their toughest problem to solve, is potential conflicts with the fishing industry. Fishermen are, by and large, their biggest opponents. Probably second only, and probably following second beyond that is protection of marine mammals. And so I just, I'm available to council members to provide any perspective that I might from having prepared environmental impact documents for offshore wind projects. But I would also think it's important for us, without overburdening our already busy, schedule, to talk about this and decide if there's a way that we can make recommendations that would be helpful to fishermen while not preventing, the offshore wind use.
Thanks. Other thoughts from anyone else in the council as to how you might want to proceed on this? Andy?
We did a little work last year with Deepwater in the site around Cox's Rhode fishing survey. And they did it in a short time at the wrong time when the fish aren't there, of course. I think it should be extended like year round to see exactly what the impact that's going to be.
Okay. Yeah, you made that point well at our August 30th meeting, and that could certainly be wrapped into a recommendation tonight if the council, if you wanted to offer that up. But again, the record's clear enough. Perhaps much of what we might want to pivot off of tonight is the meeting minutes, or the summary, if you will, of the meeting that took place on August 30th. We worked hard to try to document as much as it was offered. And one thought is to just convey the meeting minutes to the CRMC and or DM director, to reflect the council's interests and concerns as expressed, without necessarily having to reiterate it. So I think there's wide open opportunities here for the council to move forward as you see fit. Again, I just wanted to remind you that we already have the meeting summary from the August 30 meeting, at which, for example, Andy, your concerns about the rod and reel survey, the timing, and that really needs to be extended year round are documented, and then potentially anything else that the council might want to bring up tonight. Jeff?
So I just, one quick question, if I made a motion, could I have a motion that I would like to stand alone? That would preclude other people from making other motions about other things, okay? So I'm gonna make a motion, and this is, I don't fish offshore, and this is just from the interactions I have with people that say, offshore wind energy is coming, here's what you can do to make this the least amount of impact. So I'm just gonna read the motion. I make a motion to recommend to the Director of DEM and CRMC that all wind power leases off of southern New England be required to have turbines set in east-west pattern with 1 nautical mile of spacing to minimize negative impacts on historical fishing actions, and further require that the structures be removed after the lease is terminated to restore fishing access to the entire area.
So there's no way I could write that all down, but I certainly caught the drift, and I assume others did as well. So let me just ask, is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Andy D'Angelo. So probably we'll have to read that at least one more time into the record, but let's just open the floor to discussion on the motion. Jeff, why don't you begin with your thoughts on why you're offering that motion?
So this is just from what I've been told with the people that I have talked to, is that all the offshore fishing activity occurs in an east-west pattern. It always has been. Everyone, well, not always, but 30 years or more, and everyone's worked together. And if we can keep that east-west pattern with the new players in the town, it will, in the areas, that it will minimize the impacts to the historical fishing operations. And then there's obviously some concern with, once the leases are up, if there's, things left in the water that would prevent, the fishing that historically took place there when it's no longer being used, that would be negative for the, it would be a, burden for the industry even long after the wind farms are gone.
So Chris, your expertise that you've offered out, do you have, just curious as to if you have any reaction to that?
Yeah. So I think, if you, for those of us who were here on the 30th and heard the presentations, the developers are, they're always balancing requests from a wide variety of other users, and they are often very hesitant to commit to something that limits their flexibility in designing their plant arrangements. So you would hear that if they were here today, they'd probably say that. Now, what we did hear was at least one of the developers was willing to try to rearrange the layout to that. And I guess my perspective from knowing many of the development companies, they could come around to embrace that if that became sort of a way of standardizing. In fact, one of the things that I participate as part of the American Wind Energy Association is developing standards for offshore wind project design. And I might ask Dave if he has any thoughts on this. I don't know whether you went in, with Grover and in any of the meetings that you've had on CRMC, have you proposed any standard designs for offshore wind projects?
CRMC in its communication with the developers and with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Coast Guard has advocated for east-west layout, 1 nautical mile spacing for all of the development, not only in southern New England, but wherever it is to, not necessarily east-west spacing in down south, but for here,
for southern,
because of the fisheries, our Fishermen's Advisory Board has clearly stated that they could work with that. Any other array layout would radically change their current methods in fishing.
And thank you. And the reason I asked Dave for what may have transpired in other discussions is what I think we should try to avoid doing is putting an option out there that is inconsistent with the way that other resource protection agencies have attempted to shape this. And so I'm happy to hear that, and it makes me feel better about Jeff's motion, because if enough people that are interested in, marine uses and fisheries and coastal zone management consistency are sending the same message to the developers that in southern New England, east-west orientation and 1 nautical mile spacing is imperative to maintain the maximum number of consistent uses in these wind energy areas, then I would say that would be a good place for us to go.
Yeah. I agree. That sounds, and there seems to be a consensus growing. It does seem that way, and as I remember hearing the presentations, there seemed to be certainly recognition on the part of the developers that that was an issue. And my sense, therefore, is that a motion like this would reinforce what was sort of recognized as an issue and now would be driven home even more so. Jeff?
Right. The reason for part of this is when one of the developers said that they were looking into changing some of them to try to accommodate the east-west pattern. I gotta tell you, if the check's in the mail, I'm sure, that one there threw up red flags.
Thinking about looking into it, maybe.
We're considering it, and I was like, well, you're just blowing up, I mean.
Yeah.
I did not like that.
So, and if I could just, further, and I mentioned this to you, Bob, I think after the last meeting. So there's gonna be 2 more wind energy leases issued before the end of the year. They're out adjacent to the one that Vineyard Wind has out in Massachusetts wind energy area. And again, they're not in Rhode Island, and those cables to shore are not likely to come in through Rhode Island waters. But in the same vein of being interested in protection of our coastal zone, I think it would be a good idea for us to make that kind of recommendation to the director and to.
Can I clarify something there?
Sure.
The other 2, one of those cables is coming directly to Rhode Island, and the other one is coming through Rhode Island waters to land in Fall River.
Which one is coming directly to Rhode Island? Is this the new Deepwater one? Yeah, I haven't seen a layout for that one yet. I mean, that's only.
They haven't submitted their plan, but right now it's currently coming into Quonset.
Okay. And Jeff, as I remember your motion, I will ask you to read it one more time, please, but it sounded like it was pretty broad, intended to be broad in its applicability. It wasn't targeted, well, it doesn't, it was to include but not be limited to the
Correct. So it'd be Orsted and then the 2 that are going up for lease, I think that it's 5 or 6 areas, so it would be applicable to all those.
And I think
I'm trying to get ahead of the curve
Well, I agree, and what I like about that is it therefore wouldn't require this council to kind of revisit every single, at least on these issues. That doesn't mean the council might not wanna weigh in on other wind energy proposals for whatever reason, but at least with regard to this set of issues that you framed in your motion, it would be broadly applicable, and it would be a recommendation to the CRMC that moving forward, this is something that the council feels is important. So that's how I read your motion. I appreciate you bringing it forward. Further discussion on the motion? Yes?
So, and I like this general sense, and I think we should go there because there will be 5 wind energy areas, but within those wind energy areas, there may be more than one proposal. As Dave is alluding to, Deepwater is probably going to do 4 projects in their wind energy area. And as you just reported, at least one of them is going to bring a cable into Rhode Island waters. So I think it's important to be general this way so that the other users, and there could wind up being, in the 5 wind energy areas, there could be 8 or 9 different projects. And so I think it's wise for us to do that. I would also say, and we should keep, when Deepwater files the project that might bring a cable through Rhode Island waters, then I would also offer up that we might want to have an agenda item at a meeting at that time as to whether or not we would actually submit comments in the NEPA process for that particular project.
Anything from staff on this issue? Is everyone comfortable? I don't see any hands going up, so I'll assume that we have Julia here who's been tracking this issue very closely, and I don't see you shifting in your seat, but did you want to offer anything?
I guess one thing,
Yeah.
in terms of future meetings, what kinds of items do you guys want to review? Like just layout or fisheries impacts related things, or do you also want to talk to them about the biological monitoring component of their work? I mean, what do you want to hear from the developers?
I'd say all
All
of
of
the
the
above.
above.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it'd be good if we touched on it quick, but like have like if it was a more deep, we don't need to go into great detail every meeting, every time something comes up, but if it was just like an FYI thing at the end, and then someone from the council wanted to talk about it more, they bring it forward for more discussion. So we're not spending, we could spend gobs of time talking about this.
I just have one question.
Yes.
And it was asked of me that someone wanted to know, where can they get the information on public input? When is that closed on these issues? Because I've even looked it up, and it seems like it's almost intentionally made to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, they spoke, Julia's nodding yes, and there's
Yeah,
obviously
it's
different,
because
various stages.
Public trust, I'm sorry, but the public has every right to voice their opinion on this. And I have people that live in my hometown that don't fish, they could care less about it, but they're concerned about a real estate grab on the ocean. And when I explained to them ocean use policy, they kind of looked at me and said, what the hell is that? I said, well, then I think there needs to be much more public information or public input on this that is not happening.
Jason's waiting to jump in, but on this point, Jason, or do you want?
Mine is minor, so go ahead.
So I would just say, Jason, for you and for anybody, and Julia, you might be able to help get this message out too. You probably already are, but so the main federal regulatory agency that's in charge of this is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they have a website, and they list all of the public meetings for all of the projects, and you can sign up on Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's website to get notifications, and you'll get a notice of when open houses are being held, when the developer has submitted permits that have been deemed complete. You'll get all of those things. And if you want to participate as an individual or with a group, you can go to those meetings, and probably the next notice that will be coming out, there'll be a notice about Deepwater's project that's going to interconnect with Long Island. That their recent filings have been deemed complete, and so the next thing will be there'll be a notice of its availability for an environmental impact statement under the National Environmental Policy Act, and there will be public meetings associated with that.
So I can clarify that a little bit.
Yeah.
When the South Fork project for Deepwater Wind, when they submit their construction and operations plan. The notice of intent will be sent out.
Right.
Which will then create an obligation to hold public scoping meetings. At that point, there will be a public meeting in Rhode Island, public scoping meeting held by BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, with the developer for public input.
Right, and there'll probably be one in New Bedford too as well.
But I'm just saying, how does that notification go out to the public, or does the public have to research it? Because not everybody's computer literate and,
Yeah, the public has to research.
so the public has to research it. Okay.
I mean, that could be something we could put out on our listserv.
It would just make sense to me because it affects everybody.
So does that sound like a good idea to do a listserv?
Absolutely, absolutely.
When these things come through. Jason?
Yeah, and so to this point, you guys already know that you have, Dave, who's dialed in on this stuff, but I just wanted to make sure you're also aware that DEM has Julia, who's really dialed in on this stuff, and, that's definitely we definitely want to get information out to you guys. It's important to us, for you, so we'll definitely make sure to be posting, anything that, any opportunity for you guys to comment directly, we will certainly get that information out.
So, Jeff, what I'm gonna ask you to do, if you don't mind, is to read your motion one more time. I'm either gonna write really quickly, or I'm gonna ask you to submit it electronically.
Okay. Want me to just look piece by piece, or I can write it, just send it in an email?
Yeah, why don't you do that, just because it's getting late, and I think, so if you don't mind, read it one more time, we'll take a vote on it, and then if you don't mind, if you could send it to me and Pete tomorrow, we'll make sure that it's accurately recorded. So go ahead.
Make a motion to recommend to the Director of DEM and CRMC that all wind power leases off southern New England be required to have turbines set in an east-west pattern with 1 nautical mile of spacing to minimize negative impacts on historical fishing activities, and further require that all structures are removed after the lease to restore fishing access to the entire area.
With that, is the council ready for the question? If so, all in favor, raise your hand. And it's unanimous, thanks. And thanks, Jeff, for really putting a lot of excellent effort into that. Is there anything else, as you had indicated, this doesn't preclude further discussion or motions? Is there anyone else in the council that would like to make a motion? I think Jeff's done a great job of wrapping together a lot of key issues. And Andy, I think maybe to your point, it seems rather obvious, but let's just think about doing this. We have our meeting minutes from the August meeting. Now, I remember making the point, like, are you taking notes? And they said, oh yes, we're taking notes, I think, Kenny. But it certainly couldn't hurt, and I think it might not actually help to just submit those meeting minutes to the developers in the form of a summary of the discussion and comments that were offered at.
So make a motion to.
I don't even think we need a motion. I mean, you can do that if you want, just to make it clear, but the meeting is already documented. But go ahead, if you want to make a motion to just submit to the meeting minutes from the August 30 meeting. Is that what you were thinking as well?
Yes. I make that motion.
Okay, so moved by Andy and seconded by Mike Rice to just forward along. We'll just simply copy the meeting minutes with a cover letter that just says, we'll thank them for their attendance. We'll note how vital that this kind of dialogue is, and we hope that will continue. And here's a summary of the comments that were made. That certainly includes your comment about the Cox's Ledge rod wheel survey. So is there any objection to that motion? Seeing none, we'll do that. So there'll be 2 action items emerging from this agenda item, and really appreciate the council's diligence on this. I think that was the first time we've really taken on this issue. Obviously, it's a new issue, but I think we really appreciate the council's good work on it. Anything else on item 11? Just Travis.
Not sure if it's there or if it's at FYI, but 3 developers are coming to the Rhode Island Solar Anglers Association meeting in November to present to recreational fishermen basically the same pitch they gave in August. So it will have Deepwater, Bay State, and Vineyard Wind there.
Okay.
Developers.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for letting us know. Okay. With that, we're almost done. 2 FYIs. They're very important FYIs, though. So I really just want to spend a minute on each. The first update regarding pending ASMFC Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council action addressing transiting federal waters in Block Island Sound with summer flounder, scup, and it should say black sea bass. There's a typo there. It should say black sea bass. Those three species are indeed being addressed by draft addendum 31, which is poised for public comment. It's been developed as a draft document, poised for public comment. The hearing in Rhode Island is at least tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, November 7th at 6 p.m. This will go out on our listserv, but I'm just giving you a heads up that this is coming. And that hearing on Wednesday, November 7th will very likely be combined with a hearing on a separate document, another addendum, addressing 2019 recreational management programs for black sea bass and fluke. So it's going to be a big night. But on the transiting issue, I just want to give you a heads up as to what's coming. It's a proposal to establish a transit area through which non-federally permitted vessels in possession of any of those three species, legally, having been legally harvested from state waters, could transit between Rhode Island state waters surrounding Block Island and the coastal state waters of Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, or Massachusetts. That's how it's been framed. The two sort of questions that will be asked, or options that will be considered, is one, whether that should pertain to recreational vessels only, or both rec and commercial. And then two, where should that transit zone be? How should it be delineated? Again, non-federally permitted only, and it could be any rec angler if it's rec only, or it could be non-federally permitted for hire and commercial vessels as well, if commercial vessels are added in. And I know we've already talked about this, so nothing has changed here. The two transit areas that are going to be considered is one, and I have this in front of me, but I can't really, I'm sorry, we had it on the board last time, you're probably going to remember this, a sort of Rhode Island to Rhode Island corridor that goes from the north end of Block Island right into Point Judith. Of course, it's connecting state waters, but it's a line that runs, and it's a rather narrow and well-defined area that DEM staff helped to develop, and that would be very helpful for enforcement purposes because it would be so well-defined. Might not be so appealing to Connecticut and New York fishermen. The other one, though, and I'll just put that out there for what it's worth, the other option is the striped bass transit zone, which is the larger stretch of EEZ that hugs the around Block Island, kind of from Montauk all the way around to Point Judith. So those are going to be the two options. I would say that it's very important to get Rhode Island input on this issue. I mean, it really is a Rhode Island issue, largely, and so it's critical that the Rhode Island community sort of galvanize around this issue and figure out what is in Rhode Island's best interest, and then participate in that hearing. Not necessarily anticipating a council action or recommendations on it, although that could happen, but I just want to at least put that out there, and we can circle back and discuss it. But I just also want to quickly note the second issue is the update regarding federal, because it's separate, but it's so ironic how closely it relates. So the second issue is an update regarding federal review of opening the striped bass transit area in Block Island Sound to fishing for striped bass. So here the issue is that the 2018 federal budget included a provision that directs NOAA Fisheries in consultation with the ASMFC to consider lifting the ban on striped bass fishing in the Block Island Transit Zone. To initiate that review, NOAA plans to publish a notice in the Federal Register any day now. They were saying it could actually happen like today. It's going to be perhaps this week or next. It's very close. That's going to be just an initial 45-day comment period to just kind of get a read on how folks feel about that. So that comment period will run through mid or late November. Keep that in mind, because that could be an issue that this council might want to potentially offer a recommendation on. It's certainly an issue that's of importance to Rhode Island interests, striped bass interests. So I just want to put that out there. The comment is, the way the Federal Register notice will go out, it will target rec fishing only, because that's their interpretation of what Congress has asked them to look at. But if anyone feels from the public during that comment period that it should be, that the transit zone should be open to commercial fishing as well, the feds will take that into consideration. So we've got this sort of open-ended review process that's going to be launched any day now. And then I'll just finally note that after that initial round of public review, NOAA will bring the issue back before ASMFC's striped bass board for review, and then at some point thereafter, certainly deep into 2019, I would say at the earliest, then we'll make a decision on whether or not to consider that change in rule. And then down the road but also emanating from that 2018 federal budget is a similar directive to consider lifting the overall coastwide EEZ closure for striped bass. That would be up and down the coast, not just in the water surrounding Block Island. But that language specifically acknowledges the benchmark assessment for striped bass that's underway and calls upon NOAA Fisheries and ASMFC to take up consideration of that issue after the assessment is completed. So that one's a little bit more on a back burner, but those are big issues of interest, obviously, for Rhode Island. And I just want to, they're only listed here as FYIs, so at the very least, it's important for this council to be aware of those pending issues. If anyone on the council felt that it might warrant a meeting, say in early November, to address those issues and potentially formulate a recommendation, we can consider that. No one has suggested that yet, but I just want to put that out there. I talked to Pete. He said, right now, I don't think we have another meeting scheduled until December.
Yeah, we haven't had a November meeting in a while.
So we technically have a little break coming up here, which is fine, and we'll maintain that unless or until anyone suggests that we meet, for example, to offer a recommendation on any of those issues, if anyone on the council feels that it rises to that level. Council making a recommendation versus individuals participating in a public hearing, they're both important, potentially. So I just want to put those out there. I can certainly answer questions if you want, but that's my understanding of where those issues are, and really just intended to give you a heads up. So, with that, I think we are almost through. The only other business we had is potentially a special meeting on parliamentary procedures. If the council wanted to do that, we can certainly do that. It's often something we do at ASMFC, I guess every year or two, because we do a lot of parliamentary work down at ASMFC, and we have a parliamentarian come in, and we kind of go through these little exercises of how to, what are the different motions, and what priority are they given, and basically how to kind of refamiliarize ourselves with Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure. We're game as a division, and certainly me in my capacity as chair, to do that. Some would say, gee, that's the most exciting thing I can think of in the world, is to go to Narragansett and spend the evening, on parliamentary procedure. Others might say, hey, it actually is not a bad idea. So we just wanted to float that and let you know that we're game to do that. If anyone on the council feels that it's a good idea, you don't necessarily have to comment on that now, although you could. And that really is all we had left. Chris?
Well, I'll make a quick comment on that now, because I've had some struggles with that parliamentary procedure thing because of the makeup of the IAC, and every once in a while somebody decides that we're getting a little too far afield and tries to rein me back in on things, on discussion, and I just don't know that process very well. So for my own personal reasons, I'd say, I'd do it. If anybody else were interested.
Well, let it marinate. If folks think it's a good idea, let us know, let me know, let Pete know. We could potentially do a November meeting. We could do a little 1 hour session or half-hour session, whatever it might be on parliamentary procedure. We could potentially take up the striped bass transiting issue as well. So just food for thought, just that those are some issues that are sort of floating. We wanted to just tuck them in at the back of this agenda to kind of let you know that these are things that are pending, and if anyone on the council wishes to move forward, let us know. And I know it's getting late, so I didn't want to necessarily get engaged in too much more discussion on that unless anyone wants to. And so at this point, I'll say, does anyone want to comment on anything that I just mentioned, or bring up any other business? Seeing no indications, I think it's late enough to say that we are therefore choosing toward adjournment. Without objection, I think we're adjourned. Good meeting. A lot got done. Thanks so much. Have a good night.